A goddess told her she was nothing. She is going to make her wish she had looked up.
0 aptitude.
There are 2 ways a person disappears: slowly, over years of being told she did not matter, or all at once, with a truck and a goddess who could not be bothered to apologize properly. She got both. The fast one came on a Tokyo sidewalk at 1:20 in the morning, 12 blocks from a convenience store where she had spent 4 years working night shifts that paid for an apartment she did not love. She did not remember seeing the truck. She remembered the headlights for half a second. She remembered the sound, which was wrong in a way she could not place. Then, nothing. The kind of nothing that happens when a screen goes black after somebody pulls the plug out of the wall. That was the easy part. The slow part started about a minute later, in a white room, with a woman holding a clipboard. The goddess did not look up when she rated the soul standing in front of her. The goddess did not look up when she decided what that soul was getting instead of a life. The goddess did not look up because she had already decided the soul standing in front of her was not the kind of person worth looking up for. She is going to wish, eventually, that she had. This is the part of the story before she knows. The woman who had been hit by the truck came back into something that was not nothing. It was white. There was no floor and no ceiling and no walls. There was, instead, another woman. This other woman was beautiful in the impersonal way that statues are beautiful. Symmetrical, perfect, not designed for anyone in particular. Her hair was the color of paper that had been bleached too many times, and her eyes were too pale to have a real color. And she was holding something that could only be described as the idea of a clipboard. She was checking it. She was a little annoyed. She introduced herself without quite looking up as Layla. She explained that there had been a small administrative issue. A summoning ritual on her end had misfired, and the misfire had killed someone in the world the woman in front of her had been living in, and that someone was the woman in front of her. Layla delivered this in the tone of a hotel desk clerk apologizing for losing a reservation. The woman asked where she was going. Layla told her, with the patience of a person explaining something obvious to a slow person, that she would be reincarnated. That was the standard remediation. She tapped the clipboard. The woman asked more cautiously if there was any chance Layla could place her in a wealthy family. She was not asking out of greed. She was being practical. If she was getting a second life, she wanted one that did not require a graveyard shift. Layla checked something on the clipboard. She frowned. Then she informed the woman, with no particular emotion, that she had been classified as 0 aptitude and that the classification did not permit a wealthy placement. The word Layla used was classified, not measured, not assessed, not considered, classified. The way one classifies a piece of mail. The woman asked what 0 aptitude meant. She asked who decided. She asked, finally, whether Layla could simply override the rating, because surely a goddess with a clipboard had override authority on her own paperwork. Layla did not bother to answer those questions. She said the placement would be made within parameters. She said she was sorry for the inconvenience. She said something else that might have been a goodbye, but she had already started turning away before the word finished, and the white folded inward like paper into an envelope, and the woman was somewhere else. The woman did not get to say anything back to her. That was the part she would remember. The new body did not feel like a body. It felt like sleeping inside someone else's clothes. Her limbs were too short. Her fingers were too small. The pillow under her head smelled faintly of dust and something herbal that might once have been lavender and was now older than any lavender she had ever met. She sat up. The room was wrong. The ceiling was much too high for the bed, and a chandelier hung above her, real crystal, dim with neglect, a few of the candle stubs missing. The walls were papered in a pattern that had been expensive once and was now stained around the edges. A tall window with curtains that used to belong to a much bigger room had been cut down to fit the smaller frame. She walked to the mirror in the corner. The mirror, very calmly, showed her a child she had never seen before. The child was small. The child was pale. Her hair was long and almost silver, the color of moonlight when the moon is in the wrong phase. Her eyes were a very specific shade of cold blue. She was, even at 8 years old, the kind of pretty that makes adults compliment her in front of her parents. She was also, on closer inspection, dead behind the eyes. Not dead now, dead recently, the way a candle wick is dead recently after the flame has gone out. Then the memories started. They came in not as scenes, but as facts, which is how memories work when they belong to someone else. The child's name had been Ellis von Abend. Her father was Count Reed von Abend, formerly Knight Commander of the kingdom, currently a ruined man living in what had been a guest cottage on land he no longer owned. Her mother was Isabella, who managed a household of 2 servants on a stipend that did not cover food. Her sister Leah was 5 years old and did not know yet that they were poor. The reason for all of it was a name, Duke Alba. 5 years ago, during a succession dispute, Reed von Abend had discovered something about Duke Alba's faction, something cruel enough that he had refused to keep it quiet. A week later, Reed was charged with treason. The evidence was thorough. The evidence was also fabricated. By the time the truth could have been demonstrated, the von Abend family had been stripped of land, wealth, allies, and protection, and the only thing they had been allowed to keep was the title, Count, in exile inside his own city. The original Ellis had absorbed all of this at 6 years old, and she had simply stopped wanting to be alive. She had not done anything dramatic about it. She had just stopped, the way a clock stops when nobody winds it. And then the woman from the white room had taken the empty body. She, Ellis, now, sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, doing nothing, feeling a small heartbeat against ribs that were not hers and were going to have to become hers. She was not crying. She had decided in the white room with the goddess that there would be no crying. The decision held. A knock at the door, then a woman's voice on the other side, soft and careful and very, very tired. "My lady, breakfast is ready." Ellis answered that she would be down in a moment. The voice on the other side hesitated for half a second, as though it had not heard a complete sentence from this room in a very long time. Then it said, very politely, that it would wait. The dining room was smaller than its furniture deserved. The table had been built for 10. There were 5 chairs around it, 3 of them with cushions, none of the cushions matching. The light came through a tall east-facing window the family had not been able to clean in some time. Mira walked Ellis down. Mira was not much taller than Ellis was. She could not have been more than 30, but her face had the gray cast of a person who slept 4 hours a night. Ellis watched her hands as they went. Calluses, ink stains on the right thumb, a small scar where a knife had once slipped. This woman was running the house alone. At the bottom of the stairs, Ellis stopped, turned, and thanked her for waking her. She said it the way one thanks someone whose work one has actually noticed. Mira blinked. "It is nothing, my lady." Her hands kept moving against the apron she was already smoothing, as if her hands had not received the message that someone had just spoken kindly to her. The previous Ellis, she gathered, had not said please or thank you in years. She filed that observation. Her father was already at the table. Reed von Abend, in person, was a man who had once been imposing and was now occupying his chair the way a folded coat occupies a chair. He nodded to her. He asked in a voice that did not quite manage casual whether she had slept well. He used the word health. Was her health better today? Was she feeling stronger today? The original Ellis had spent 2 years not really eating. He was checking. "I slept well. I am hungry." The relief that passed across his face was small enough that Ellis could pretend she had not seen it, which was the polite thing to do. Her mother kissed the top of her head when she sat down. Isabella was thinner than the family portraits in the hall suggested, but she was holding herself the way trained women hold themselves when there is nothing left to hold but posture. She passed Ellis a plate. The plate had bread on it that was nearly black, a wedge of something Ellis would not have called cheese, and a bowl of soup that was mostly water with a few pieces of root vegetable trying to make a quorum. Leah was already eating. She was 5. She had silver blonde hair like Ellis's, and she was wearing a dress that had been made for someone bigger and pinned to fit. And she was talking with her mouth full about a dream where a fluffy dog had visited her. "He had fur as soft as a cloud," she announced, with the kind of certainty only 5-year-olds can muster. Then she paused. She looked at their mother. She added in the same bright voice that she knew the family could not have one. She knew. It was not a complaint. It was a piece of information she was offering up, the way children do when they are practicing being helpful. Her mother smiled. The smile did not reach the place where smiles are supposed to reach. Ellis looked at the bread. She looked at Leah. She looked at her father, who was eating his own bread because he had to set the example, and because pride was the only thing he had left to spend. In her head, she started a list. She was going to feed these people. She was going to put them back inside walls thicker than the ones they were sitting in. And one day, very far from now, or possibly very soon, She was going to find the person whose name was Duke Alba, and she was going to make him very, very sorry. She did not say any of this out loud. She asked her sister to tell her about her dream again. It had sounded interesting. After breakfast, Ellis went up and started reading. The room had a small library, 2 shelves built into one wall, mostly old, mostly inherited from a household that had once owned them and now belonged to nobody in particular. The first thing she needed was the system. Magic existed here as a fact. She had absorbed that much from the inherited memories. What she did not have was a working knowledge of how a person actually used it, because the original Ellis had never tried. She sat on the rug. She closed her eyes. She did what the magic premier in her hands told her to do. She felt for the warm thing inside her chest that was not blood and not breath, and when she found it, she tried to push a little of it out through her fingers. It worked on the 3rd attempt. A small white light gathered at the tip of her index finger and sat there, perfectly stable, waiting for her to do something with it. She held it for a while. She let it die. She made a new one. She made the new one a little brighter, then a little dimmer. Then she shaped it into a small disc instead of a sphere, just to see if she could. She could. The mana volume was not large. She could feel that. But the control was very clean. It did not flicker. It did not waver. It did not bleed off in directions she had not asked it to bleed in. Whoever had decided she had 0 aptitude had been measuring something they could not see. She read for the rest of the afternoon. Geography, because she needed to know where the borders were. Economics, because she needed to know what professions paid. History, because the people she planned to ruin were going to have ancestors, and she wanted to know which ancestors. And then, on the bottom shelf, behind a book about animal husbandry that had clearly never been opened, she found a volume titled The Lost Technical System, Alchemy. She pulled it down. By the time the light outside the window had turned the color of weak tea, she had read enough to know 2 things. The first was that alchemy in this world was not what alchemy had been in hers. It was real. It manipulated matter through mana the way chemistry manipulates matter through energy. It produced things one could sell. The second was that the only place that taught it properly was somewhere called the Royal Lapisford Academy. Tuition was an entrance fee of 50 gold coins and an annual fee of 100 more. Her family's net worth, as far as she had been able to figure out, was approximately 1 piece of furniture above 0. She closed the book carefully. She did not throw it across the room. She had decided in the white room with the goddess that there would be no throwing things either. The next morning, Ellis went out to the garden. The garden was a strip of flagstones the staff had stopped maintaining in the year of her father's trial, and the weeds had won. It had room enough for her to stand and try things without setting the house on fire. She made fire, a small flame, balanced at the end of one finger, the size of a candle wick. She held it. She let it grow. She let it shrink. She noted that fire was harder than light, that it pulled more out of her and pulled it faster, and she filed the observation alongside the others. While she was practicing, she found a folded piece of paper wedged into the back of the little garden shed, where someone had used it years ago to keep the door from swinging shut. The paper, unfolded, was a brochure. The Royal Lapisford Academy, Alchemy Department. Accepting talented students from any background, the brochure announced, in the kind of cheerful font that institutions use when they want one to forget how much they cost. She read the small print. The small print was the tuition figure she had already memorized, plus an additional column titled Scholarships. Available, the column said, for the top 3 candidates of an annual recommendation exam. The recommendation exam required a sponsor. The family had no sponsor. She folded the brochure very neatly, and she put it in her pocket. Ellis brought it up at dinner. She did not lead with the tuition number. She led with the school, the Royal Lapisford Academy, the alchemy program, the only place to learn, the only skill in this world she already had a head start on. Her father set down his spoon. She watched him try to assemble a face that was not despair. He told her, in the careful voice he used for everything now, that the academy was an excellent goal, that he was proud she had it. Her mother put her hand on his arm. They did not need to say the rest. The rest was the column with the gold coins. The rest was the empty drawer where the family vault used to be. The rest was the apology her father started to make before Ellis cut him off, gently, by telling him she would handle the money. She would not say how. She would not promise a timeline. She would handle it. He looked at her for a long second. He did not ask what she meant. He nodded once. He picked up his spoon. Her mother did not look at either of them. She was looking at her own hands, very intently, the way a person does when they are not allowing themselves to cry at the table. Ellis kept eating her soup. The soup tasted like water with opinions. She had a plan now. The plan plan was not subtle. The plan was that the city of Lapisford had a building in it called the Adventurers Guild, and the Adventurers Guild paid copper coins to people who completed errands, and copper coins added up into silver, and silver into gold, and gold into the right to walk through the front door of a school where she was going to learn how to make her family rich. Nobody at the academy would care that she was 8 years old, because by the time she got there, she would have proven she deserved to be there. Nobody at the guild was going to want to register an 8-year-old either. She was going to make them anyway. The next morning, Ellis was at the front door before the household was awake. She had Leah's old boots on. Leah had outgrown them, and they fit her well enough. She had a small purse at her belt, with the few copper coins she had found in the bottom of a forgotten drawer. She had washed her face in cold water. She had pinned her hair back. She had decided what she was going to say at the guild, and she had decided what she was going to do if they laughed at her, which was that she was going to keep standing there until somebody got tired of laughing. She opened the door slowly. The hinges complained, then thought better of it. The street outside was gray and empty, the way the world is gray and empty before it remembers to wake up. The capital of Lapisford lay ahead of her in pieces she could see and pieces she could not. Somewhere inside it was a building called the Adventurers Guild. Somewhere inside that building was her first piece of money. She thought about Layla briefly. The way one thinks about a person one intends to make regret something, 0 aptitude, they would see. She closed the door behind her very quietly. She started walking. The Adventurers Guild was loud before Ellis opened the door, and louder after. Inside, it was a long oak counter, a tall wall covered in pinned quest slips, 3 round tables of grown men drinking something she would not have called breakfast, and a smell that she would learn later was the smell of hard work and old beer in the same room. She walked up to the counter. Nobody noticed her at first because nobody was looking down. The receptionist behind the counter had cat ears, soft brown ones that twitched when she heard the door, and a tail that flicked once when she saw who had walked in. The receptionist leaned over the counter to get a better look at the small figure in front of it. Her face went from professional to amused to gently puzzled in about 2 seconds. Ellis told her she was there to register as an adventurer. The room found out about it almost immediately. One of the men at the round tables snorted into his cup. Another one started laughing. The third one said something that does not bear repeating, and several people thought that was very funny. The receptionist, whose name Ellis would later learn was Mimi, was at least kind about it. She smiled the small, careful smile one smiles at lost children. She told Ellis, in the softest voice she could manage, that the guild did not register children. She offered to help her find her mother. Ellis told her she had no mother to find. She told her she needed money. She told her she could pay the registration fee. The hall got a little quieter for a second. Then it got louder again. Mimi was opening her mouth to deliver the version of her refusal that did not include offering to find a parent, and that was when the deep voice came from somewhere behind the counter. Interesting. The hall went silent, the way a hall goes silent when somebody who matters has decided to say something. Mimi straightened up. Her ears tipped forward. Several of the men at the round tables put their cups down. Ellis had not yet turned her head to see who had spoken, but she had already decided that whoever it was, she was going to make sure he did not regret it. Dorgan Blasthammer was a dwarf, and Dorgan Blasthammer was twice Ellis's height. He carried a battle axe over one shoulder the way a man carries a coat, casually, as though the weight of it had stopped being interesting to him sometime around his 30th birthday. His beard was the color of iron with patches of rust. His eyes were the kind of dark gray that looks black until the light hits it right. He looked at her for a long second when they came out into the training yard. Then he said he liked her eyes. He said he saw smoldering embers in them. He said it the way a man says something he is willing to defend if anyone challenges him on it, and he was not smiling. He pointed at the wooden dummy in the middle of the yard. "Hit it, best you have." She walked up to it. She felt for the warm thing in her chest. She gathered a small amount of mana. Not all of it, only what she needed, only what she could control cleanly. And she shaped it into fire about the size of an apple, and she sent it at the dummy's center, and it left a dark scorch mark exactly where she had aimed. The flame died on contact, the way well-controlled flames should. Dorgan grunted. He walked over to the dummy. He put one massive thumb against the scorch mark. He turned and looked at her again. Mana's small. He held the thumb up against the light. Control's not. He went on, after that, about people twice her age who could not place a fireball that cleanly. He did not phrase it kindly. He phrased it the way an inspector marks a passing grade. Then he produced a small copper plate from somewhere on his belt, walked back across the yard, and ruffled her hair with one rough hand on his way to her. The plate landed in her palm, F rank, her name on it as soon as she gave it. He asked what to put on the plate. Ellis. He looked at her for one more beat. Whatever he was looking for, he found enough of it to nod and walk away. She held the plate. It was small. It weighed almost nothing. It was the first thing in this world she had earned with her own hands. And she was 8 years old, and she was an adventurer. Over the next several weeks, Ellis learned a number of things. She learned that lily grass grows in clusters near streams, and not the place the guild's quest map said it did. She learned that slimes are mostly water, mostly green, mostly stupid, and mostly immune to her small utility knife in a way that felt personally insulting the first time she tried. She learned that fire works on slimes the way fire works on most things, directly, conclusively, without argument. After the first slime, she did not have to think about the spell anymore. She had it ready before they finished noticing her. She learned the rhythm of it, wake before dawn, out the back door, across the city through alleys most adults did not bother with because most adults were not 8. Quest collected, forest, quest completed, back through the same alleys, bath in cold water from the rain barrel before the household saw what color her dress had become, dinner, bed. The first day she earned 5 copper coins, the 5th day, 10. By the end of the second week, she had a small drawstring pouch under her mattress that made a very satisfying sound when she shook it. She was careful. She took only quests Mimi had stamped from the safe board. She came home before the light went orange. She did not pick fights with anything bigger than her shoulder. She almost made it. There was a quest at the edge of the gathering zone that paid more because it took longer, and Ellis had taken it because the math added up, and she had come home an hour later than she should have. The light was wrong. The household was awake. She came in through the back door with her dress brown to the knee and an iron smell on her hands from the small wound she had not bothered to bind. She took the boots off in the doorway. She climbed the back stairs barefoot. She was 3 steps from her bedroom door when a voice stopped her. Lady Ellis. She turned around. Mira was standing at the far end of the hall, one hand still on the kitchen door behind her. She had not raised her voice. She was looking at the hem of Ellis's dress and at the streak of mud on her cheek and at her expression, which she had never been any good at controlling when she had been caught with both hands full. Where? Mira said. Have you been? Ellis tried the version where she had taken a walk. She made it about 2 sentences in before Mira's eyes did something that made her stop. Mira did not call her a liar. She just said, very evenly, that they should speak in Ellis's room. Ellis told her they should. Mira let her go up the stairs first. She closed the bedroom door behind her with the careful click of a person who did not want anyone else in the house to hear what was about to be said. Mira poured tea. Ellis let her. She had figured out by then that letting people do the small things first was how one bought oneself 10 seconds to think. Mira set the cup in front of her. She sat on the edge of the chair, the way one sits when one intends to leave shortly. She asked again where Ellis had been. Ellis told her the truth, all of it. The Adventurers Guild, the F-rank plate, the slimes, the copper coins, the plan to save up enough to attend the Royal Lapisford Academy and learn alchemy and pull the family out of the slums one rung at a time. She did not perform any of it. She just laid it out, the way one lays out evidence. When she was done, Mira did not say anything for a while. Then Mira told her she had known something was different. The smell on Ellis's clothes, iron, dirt, monster. The new alertness in her eyes. The fact that the previous Ellis had not thanked her for anything in 2 years, and the new one had thanked her on the first morning. Mira was a maid, she said. She paid attention to small things because small things were her job. She told Ellis she was going to die. She did not say it like a threat. She said it like a person who had watched it happen. Ellis argued back. She slammed the 5 copper coins from that day's quest down on the table between them, not for effect, but because she needed Mira to see them, because she needed her to understand that she was going to do this, whether Mira helped her or not. She told her she had spent her entire previous life not getting to choose anything that mattered. She told her that was over. Mira looked at the coins for a long time. Then she cried. She cried the way exhausted women cry, quietly, without drama, with one hand pressed against her mouth, as though she did not want the sound of it to escape into the hallway. She cried the way a person cries when something old has just been opened. She told Ellis about her brother. He had been a year younger than she was. He had wanted, very badly, to be an adventurer. The family could not have stopped him and had not really tried. He had registered at 16. He had died at 17 in a dungeon to a goblin, and the only thing the guild had returned to her family had been his copper plate in a small wooden box. She had been waiting, she told Ellis, to find out whether the new Ellis was the kind of girl who would understand a story like that, or the kind of girl who would not. Ellis understood it. They made their deal then. Mira would not tell the parents. Ellis would not take quests above the rank Mira approved. Ellis would come home before the sunset, and if she was hurt, she would tell Mira before she tried to hide it. 3 conditions. They were not negotiable. Ellis agreed to all 3. When Mira left, Ellis sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, looking at the 5 copper coins on the table. They had been weightless when she earned them. They were not weightless now. Several weeks later, Ellis had 50 copper coins in the drawstring pouch and a destination. The bookstore was called the Temple of Wisdom, and it deserved the name. 3 stories. Shelves the height of a tall man. A reading window taller than the door she had walked through. Books with the kind of leather covers that meant somebody, somewhere, had cared about the inside enough to dress the outside for it. She stood in the entryway for a moment longer than she needed to, partly because she was 8, and partly because the room was the kind of room that made a person stand still. The alchemy section was on the 2nd floor. She climbed the stairs slowly, partly to read the spines on the way up. She found a beginner's volume, First Alchemy, making everyday elixirs with pot and magic, for 40 copper coins, which left her 10 for a herb encyclopedia. She sat down on the small bench beside the shelf and opened the alchemy book, partly to confirm she wanted to spend the money on it, and partly because she wanted to. That was when the 2 girls walked past. They were Royal Lapisford Academy students, by the crest on their satchels. They were maybe 16. They were complaining cheerfully about an alchemy assignment one of them had not finished, and they were also passing along a piece of gossip that one of them had only half heard. The Lazaral Duke's son, the older girl said, had fallen ill. Some kind of strange illness. Doctors could not figure it out. Something in Ellis's chest did one small unhappy turn. She knew the name. The inherited memories had a whole drawer labeled Lazaral. The Lazaral Duke family was the rival of the Alba Duke family, and the Alba Duke family was the reason her father did not have a kitchen in his own house. A son of the Lazarals falling ill of something nobody could explain was not, technically, her problem. The other girl said something quieter then. She said maybe the Albas had something to do with it. The first girl shushed her. They moved past Ellis's bench and out of earshot. She sat there for a long moment with the alchemy book open across her lap. Then she made herself focus on the page, because whatever was happening between 2 Duke families, she had no part of yet. What was in front of her was a recipe she could actually use. She picked up the herb encyclopedia from the lower shelf. Forest Blessings. Introduction. 10 copper coins. Cheap and basic. She paid the old shopkeeper at the counter. She tucked both books under one arm and walked out into a sky the color of orange peel. She held the books tight enough that the leather pressed into her ribs. The 50 copper coins were gone. The plan was beginning. The alchemy book was not written for beginners. The herb encyclopedia Ellis finished in 2 evenings. It was useful in the way a glossary is useful. It confirmed names of plants she already knew, corrected 1 or 2 assumptions she had been making in the forest, and otherwise sat on the shelf where it belonged. The alchemy book was a different animal. It was written in the dense philosophical style of a person who believed his readers had 3 years of preparatory reading. The first chapter was about a thing the author called the catalyst, a transformed state of mana, distinct from the ordinary working magic everyone in this world used. One converted ordinary mana into a catalyst. Then, one used the catalyst to manipulate matter. The conversion, according to the book, was a small and elegant procedure that any disciplined student could perform. It was not a small and elegant procedure. It was a wall. She sat on the edge of her bed. She cleared her mind the way the book described. She felt for the warm thing in her chest. She drew a small magic circle in the air with her finger, the way the diagrams in the book showed, and she poured ordinary mana into it. Ordinary light came out. Useless ordinary light. The same kind she had been making in the garden for weeks. The circle dissipated before she had even completed it. She tried again. Same result. She tried with her eyes closed. Same result. She tried lying on her back. Same result. By the 3rd hour, she had begun to suspect that the book was lying about the smallness and elegance of the procedure. By the 5th hour, she was sweating and her heart was beating in her ears, and she had not produced anything that even gestured at a catalyst. By the time the candle had burned low enough that she could no longer pretend it was reasonable to keep going, she sat back against the headboard and considered, briefly, whether the goddess had been right after all. She considered it for about 5 seconds. Then she reset the magic circle and started over. One did not get to walk away from a wall the first night one found it. One showed up tomorrow night and walked at it again. The wall came down on the 7th night. She had stopped trying so hard. That, looking back, was the trick. She had been pushing mana into the circle the way one pushes something heavy uphill, straining, watching, willing it to hold its shape. The book mentioned in a footnote she had skimmed past 4 times that the conversion required relaxation rather than force. Mana, said the footnote, did not respond to demands. It responded to invitation. She tried it relaxed. She let the circle exist. She let the mana move into it the way water moves into a basin. The circle held. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the white light she had been producing all her life, the small, clean light she had been so proud of in the garden, did something she had never seen it do. It turned gold. A warm, deep, true gold. The color of late autumn light through a window. Not bright, not dim, steady. The book, when she checked it later, called this the philosopher's light and noted that practitioners who achieved it were considered exceptional in their generation, and that historically, very few alchemists in any given century produced one of any quality. She sat in front of the gold light for what felt like a long time and was probably less than a minute. The original Ellis, somewhere in the inherited memories, had once been told by a household tutor that her magic was unremarkable. She had absorbed that. She had stopped trying. She had spent 2 years not eating, in part because there was nothing she had been told she was good at to eat for. The body had carried the answer the whole time. The girl had not been told the right things to look for. Ellis let the catalyst sit in her palm for one more moment. She thanked the body. Then she turned to the next chapter. The chapter was titled Basic Alchemy Practice, Extracting the Soul of Herbs. The simplest recipe in it was a lily herb wound salve. She had lily grass in front of her, fresh from a quest 2 days earlier, the quality of which she had been unable to assess. She prepared the materials. She activated water with a small charge of mana. She crushed the lily leaves and added them. She held the philosopher's light over the mixture and channeled it down through her fingers into the bowl. The mixture glowed. It thickened. The water turned a clear emerald gel. She tested it on a small cut she made on the back of her hand on purpose to be sure of the result and not the wishful thinking. The cut closed. There was no scar. There was no trace. She sat very still on the floor and looked at her hand for a long time. Then she made another batch because she was not going to spend the night being amazed when she could spend it learning. She made the wound salve every night for a week and sold none of it. The salve was good. The salve was probably saleable, but the salve was not the goal. The goal was a recovery potion, the kind adventurers carried in their belts, the kind the guild paid silver for, the kind that would actually move her toward the academy in coins instead of inches. The recipe for a basic recovery potion was 3 steps further into the alchemy book. It required a second herb, Hilkendau root, ground fine, and added to a base solution. It required a longer extraction. It required, the book noted carefully, the alchemist to maintain magical control through a phase the book called the harmonization, in which 2 natively incompatible ingredients had to be persuaded to share a single solution. The book's advice on this phase was not encouraging. The book described several ways the harmonization commonly failed, including ones that involved the destruction of glassware. She locked her door. She told Mira, when Mira asked through it whether she needed anything, that she was studying and would prefer not to be interrupted. Mira did not push. She prepared the materials slowly, purified water in the flask, Hilkendau root ground to a fine powder, added gently. The water turned a deep blue, exactly the color the book described. Lily leaves added one at a time, the blue softening to emerald green as the second herb went in. So far, the book and she were in agreement. She began the extraction. She poured a thread of mana into the flask, very slowly, the way one eases into a hot bath. The components in the solution began to swirl. The cell walls of the herbs broke. The active components dissolved out into the water. Impurities settled to the bottom. The supernatant was the color of new spring grass and very clear. This was as far as the book had ever been encouraging. She formed the philosopher's light in her palm. She lowered her palm to the flask. She touched the gold to the green. The flask flashed white. The liquid inside boiled hard against the glass, ran up the sides, threatened to take the cork off, and possibly the wall behind the desk with it. The gold catalyst and the herbal solution were rejecting each other so violently that the heat of the rejection alone was beginning to crack the bowl she had set the flask in. She had 2 seconds, maybe 3, before something broke. She almost panicked. She felt it start. Then a memory surfaced, very specifically, a chemistry professor in her first life, talking about reactive incompatibilities, telling a class of bored undergraduates that the most common student error was forcing a reaction that needed a bridging agent. Add the bridge, he had said, calmly, always calmly. The catalyst was the issue. The catalyst was too pure to interface with the herbal solution directly. It needed an intermediary mana, something dirtier, something less perfect, something to bridge the two. She had that. She touched the side of the flask with her left hand. She let her own ordinary working mana, the kind she had been making in the garden, the kind that made small white lights flow into the glass alongside the gold. The reaction calmed in stages. First, the boiling slowed. Then the gold and the green stopped repelling each other. Then they blended. The liquid in the flask shifted color through several values of red and settled, finally, into a deep ruby that held a faint internal glow even in the candlelight. A sweet floral smell filled the room. She sat down on the floor next to the desk because her legs had stopped being entirely interested in standing. She had a recovery potion. By every standard the book described, she had an exceptional one. She divided the potion in the morning, 2 vials. One she corked tight, wrapped in clean linen, and put on the high shelf in her wardrobe for emergencies, in case anyone in the household ever needed it. The other she wrapped in a separate cloth, put inside an inner pocket she had sewn into her cloak the previous week for this exact purpose, and pulled the cloak on. The cloak had a hood. The hood was deep enough to cover her hair entirely, which was the point. A child with silver blonde hair and noble features delivering an extraordinary alchemical product would attract a kind of attention she was specifically not interested in attracting. Before she left, she did something she had not been brave enough to do until she had the result in her hand. She tested the spare vial on a deliberate small cut on her arm. The wound closed in under a second. No scar, no trace. The potion's quality was real. Mira met her on the back stairs with a small parcel of bread and cheese for the road and a careful look that meant she had questions she was not going to ask. "You will be careful," Mira said. It was not a question. "I will," she nodded. "You will be back before sundown." "Yes. And whatever this is," her eyes went briefly to the lump the hood made over the vial. "You will tell me if it goes wrong." "I will." She let Ellis past her without saying anything else. The fact that she did not press meant she understood. The fact that Ellis did not explain meant Ellis respected her enough not to make her complicit in something she had not agreed to be complicit in. She stepped out the back door into the morning street. The cloak settled around her shoulders. She started walking toward the guild. The guild hall was busy. There were adventurers at the counter checking in returns, mages at one of the round tables comparing notes about a difficult contract, a priest at another table rebandaging his own forearm because the guild healer was not in until afternoon. Nobody looked at Ellis when she came in. She went to the counter. Mimi was there, head down in paperwork, ears twitching in irritation at whatever she was reading. She looked up when Ellis cleared her throat. "Lady Ellis," Mimi caught herself. In the guild, she was just Ellis. Quest return? No. She unwrapped the cloth on the vial and set it on the counter. The ruby liquid caught the lantern light and threw red gold reflections across the wood. "I have something to sell." Mimi reached for it the way receptionists reach for items on counters, professionally, with one practiced hand. Her hand stopped about 2 inches from the bottle. Her ears went flat against her skull. Her tail, which had been swaying behind her in idle annoyance, bristled. The mages at the round table stopped talking. The priest with the bandage looked up. A woman near the back of the hall, whom Ellis had not noticed before, lowered her cup very slowly to the table without looking down at the cup. The aura coming off the vial, the magical signature Ellis's body had become trained enough to feel as ordinary. The signature she had stopped registering as unusual sometime around the 3rd batch was apparently not ordinary at all. Mimi looked up at her. Her eyes were wide. Her voice, when she found it, was very careful. "Where?" she said. "Did you get this?" Ellis had been ready for the question. She delivered the cover. She told Mimi she had been on a quest in the southern forest 2 weeks ago. She told her that deeper in than she should have gone. She made sure to look slightly embarrassed, the way a child caught breaking the rules looks slightly embarrassed. She had encountered a man living alone in a cabin near a stream. She told her he had introduced himself only as a wandering alchemist. She told her he had given her the potion as a trial product and asked her to bring it to the guild on his behalf, partly to see how it was received, and partly because he himself avoided cities. She told her she did not know his name. It was an entirely fictional cabin. There was no man. There was no stream. There was, somewhere in this kingdom, a precedent of reclusive master alchemists working through intermediaries, and Ellis had decided that precedent was going to be her coverage from now on. Mimi listened to the whole story. Her ears were still flat. She did not interrupt. When Ellis finished, she looked at the vial again. She looked at Ellis again. She did not believe her, or she did not entirely believe her, but she could not assess the value of the potion herself, and the policy on items above her appraisal grade was not negotiable. She leaned back from the counter and called, loudly enough that the entire hall could hear her over the low murmur, for the guildmaster. Dorgan led Ellis into his office. He closed the door. He set the vial on the desk. He took a small monocle from a drawer, a magical appraisal lens, cut from crystal and rimmed in dull gold, and he held it up to one eye and look through it at the bottle. He did not speak for nearly a minute. When he lowered the monocle, he set it down on the desk very carefully, the way a man sets down a dangerous tool. He looked at her. His expression had moved past surprise and into something flatter and harder to read. 0 impurities. It was not a question. He was telling her what he had seen. He told her in the next minute that the mana circulation inside the vial was patterned in a way he had only ever read about in a textbook from a school that no longer existed. He told her the closest comparison he could make was the work of the court alchemist of a kingdom that had collapsed 200 years before either of them was born. He told her that as the guildmaster of Lapisford, he was supposed to be able to assess any saleable goods presented at his counter, and that the vial in front of him was the first item he had been handed in his career that he could not properly value. He asked very quietly whether her master had any other students. She told him no. She told him the man in the forest was alone, had no apprentices, and had not made it sound as though he intended to take any. Dorgan grunted. He picked up a heavy purse from the second drawer of the desk. He counted 10 silver coins out onto the wood between them and pushed them across to her side. Worth more, by a lot. He paused. He looked at her hard. This is the part where I tell you something, Ellis, and you need to hear it the way I am saying it. She waited. That bottle, he said, in the wrong hands gets you killed. Nobles will want the source. Smugglers will want the source. Other guilds will want the source. And one of them, somewhere, will not bother asking. Your master is going to be hunted for the rest of his life by people he has never met. And so are you. If anyone connects you to this, he pushed the silver another inch toward her. From now on, anything from your master comes only to me. You do not show it to Mimi first. You do not let it sit on the counter where the room can feel it. You walk straight to my door. Do you understand? I understand, he nodded once. The interview was over. He stood. He opened the office door for her and let her back out into the hall. The hall was, if anything, quieter than when she had walked in. She walked out of the guild with 10 silver coins in her purse and the cover story holding, for now, and a very specific knowledge in the bottom of her stomach. The goddess had told her she was 0 aptitude. The guildmaster had just told her, without ever quite saying so, that she was something the kingdom did not have a word for yet. They were going to see which of them was right. Ellis was supposed to go straight home from the silver exchange. The exchange was a small, respectable shop one street over from the guild, where a man with a careful face had taken her 10 silver coins and given her, in exchange, smaller coins easier to spend without anyone asking why an 8-year-old girl was carrying full silver. She had counted them twice. She had stitched them inside an inner pocket of the cloak. She had pulled the hood up. The shortcut through the back alley was the kind of decision an adult mind in a child's body makes the way an adult mind always makes them. 2 minutes saved. Lower foot traffic. No reason not to. The alley was not lower foot traffic that afternoon. There was a small crowd of people around a stretch of stacked iron cages along the back wall, and there was a man in front of the cages calling out prices in a voice that carried more confidence than the merchandise deserved. She stopped at the edge of the crowd and read the situation in about 3 seconds. It was a black market animal merchant. The cages were too small. The animals in them were the kind of small forest creatures that should have been in forests. A fennec with one ear chewed, a small pale lizard, 2 glass-eyed rabbits in the same cage trying not to touch each other. Some of the inherited memories Ellis had absorbed from the original Ellis included the legal status of operations like this one. They were not legal. They were not, however, particularly hard to find in this part of the capital, because the people whose job it was to enforce that particular law had been selectively reassigned during her father's trial and had not been replaced. She started to back out of the alley. She had no business there, and any business she did have there would attract attention she had spent the entire morning specifically avoiding. That was when she heard the sound. It was small. It came from the lowest cage in the stack. The cage was rusted at the corners and missing one of its bars on the long side. The thing inside the cage was a wolf pup, white as a snowfield, no bigger than her 2 cupped hands, and it was crying the way an animal cries when it has stopped expecting anything. The merchant kicked the cage. He explained to nobody in particular and to everyone that this one was useless, would not eat, would not perform, would not even bite, and that he was going to mark it down to almost nothing because he was tired of feeding it. He spat on the ground beside the cage. In some some other universe, Ellis would have turned and walked back out of the alley, because that was the safe move, and she had already made the safe move her entire previous life. In this universe, she had a 4-year-old sister at home who had asked brightly for a fluffy dog, and who had then accepted brightly that the family could not have one. She stepped through the crowd. She asked the merchant, in the calmest version of an 8-year-old's voice she could produce, how much for the white one. He turned. He looked at her, the small girl in the oversized cloak, and his face did something practiced. He started a sales pitch. She cut him off. She asked again, how much? He named a price that was high for the merchandise and low for the room, 3 silver. He was hoping a noble's child with a hood pulled up that far had more silver on her than sense. She had 3 silver. She produced them. She set them in his hand, carefully, one at a time, because she wanted the sound of them landing to be the loudest part of the transaction. The crowd murmured a little. A girl her age with that much loose silver was unusual enough to comment on. She did not turn around to see the faces. The merchant unlocked the cage. The pup did not move. Ellis crouched down. She reached in slowly. She did not say anything to her. She just put her hand inside the cage at the level of her nose and let her smell it for as long as she needed to. After perhaps a minute, the pup pressed the side of her face into Ellis's palm. She lifted her out. The pup weighed almost nothing. She tucked her inside the front fold of the cloak, against the inner pocket where the silver had been earlier, and walked out of that alley without looking at the merchant again. The pup did not cry on the way home. She closed her bedroom door behind her. She set the pup on the rug. She poured a little water into a saucer and set the saucer next to her. The pup did not move at first. Then, very slowly, she tilted her head toward the water and drank. When she lifted her head, she had a single drop hanging off her chin, and she was looking at Ellis as though she had decided something. Ellis did not know what she had decided. She sat down on the rug across from her, cross-legged, and waited to see. The pup walked across the rug. She stopped about a foot from Ellis. She sat. She watched her face. Ellis took the cloth and cleaned the worst of the cage dirt off her fur, working slowly, the way one works on something that flinches if one goes too fast. The pup let her. When she was done, the pup nudged the heel of her hand with her nose, not hard. Ellis rubbed behind her ears with one finger. The pup closed her eyes. A knock at the door. Mira's voice, careful through the wood. Dinner was ready in 10 minutes. Ellis answered that she would be down. She looked at the pup. The pup looked at her. They had a problem, the two of them, which was that Ellis was not going to be able to introduce her to the family in a controlled way during a dinner she had not prepared anyone for. She lifted her gently and slid her under the bed. She told her, very quietly, to stay there for a little while. She told her she would come get her after dinner. She told her not to make any noise. The pup tucked her nose between her front paws and looked at her as though she had understood. Ellis went down to dinner. The dining room was waiting for her when she came in. Reed was already at the head of the table, hands folded around the stem of his water cup, the way a man holds something to keep his hands occupied. Her mother was not yet eating. Leah had not been brought down. Mira had her finishing something in the kitchen, Ellis gathered. Mira herself was at the side of the room, very straight, very pale. Ellis sat down. She picked up her spoon. Her father set his cup down. He looked at her. He asked, with the careful evenness of a man who has rehearsed the question, where she had been going in the mornings, and what she had been doing with the time, and why his daughter was coming home with the smell of the outside on her clothes and bruises on her shins he had only noticed because she had not been hiding them well enough. She set her spoon down. She told him the truth, not the cover story, not the version with the master in the forest. The plain truth, the one she had been carrying alone for weeks. Except for Mira, she had registered as an adventurer. She had been completing quests. She had been earning money. She had been saving it for the Royal Lapisford Academy because she had decided alchemy was the only path she could see forward, and because the alternative was watching this family slowly run out of options. She did not perform any of it. She just laid it down in front of him, the way one lays down evidence. He did not respond right away. Mira stepped forward then. Before he could say anything to Ellis, she addressed both parents, her hands behind her back, her voice steady, and informed them that she had known for several weeks, that she had agreed to keep the secret, that she accepted full responsibility for the deception, and that any consequences belonged to her. Her mother made a small sound. It was not crying. It was the sound a person makes when they have been afraid of one thing and the thing turns out to be something else. Ellis cut Mira off. She told her parents that the deception had been hers, that she had asked Mira to keep it, that Mira had been protecting her from a worse plan she would have made anyway. She did not let her take the blame. That was the moment Leah chose to walk in. She had Palm in her arms. She had been sent up to her room briefly to change for dinner, and her room was 3 doors down from Ellis's, and apparently a 4-year-old's first response response to hearing a small, unfamiliar sound from under her sister's bed was to investigate. She had Palm under one arm, the way one carries a stuffed animal one has already decided is one's own, and she was walking in her bare feet, and she announced into the suddenly silent dining room that there was a fluffy thing in Ellis's room and that its name was Palm. She had named the wolf in the time it took to walk down the stairs. The dining room held its breath. Her father looked at the wolf. He looked at Ellis. He looked at Leah. Leah smiled at him. She did not understand that she had walked into a confrontation. She thought she had walked into the part where she got to show her sister the new family member. Palm, in Leah's arms, looked at Ellis, then looked at Leah, then settled into Leah's grip with the immediate decisiveness of an animal that had identified the warmest spot in the room. Her father did not laugh, but the corners of his mouth changed shape in a way Ellis had not seen them change in weeks. The conversation that came after was not the conversation Ellis had prepared for. Her mother apologized first. Ellis had not expected that. She apologized for not noticing what Ellis had been doing. She apologized for not noticing what it had cost her to do it alone. She thanked her, in the careful voice she used for things that mattered, for keeping food on the table when she had not been able to. Ellis did not know what to do with that. She did not know how to receive it. She told her, finally, that she had no business apologizing for surviving something that was not her fault. Her father was quieter. He did not apologize. What he did was set conditions, the way a man sets conditions when he has decided he is allowed to set them. No quests above the rank Mira approved. Return before sunset. Full report of any injury before any attempt to hide it. He looked at her directly when he said the last one. He had noticed the bruises on her shins. He had also noticed, she realized, that she had not been hiding them very well, which was what had given him the courage to ask the question in the first place. She agreed to all three conditions. They were the same three Mira had given her. The household had aligned itself around the same set of rules without consulting itself. The wolf was the easier conversation. Leah had already named her. Leah had already, by holding her, made her a member of the household. The most her father could do was ask dryly what she ate and what she would do when she grew, and whether anyone had thought through the practical implications of a wild animal in a noble residence. Leah answered all three questions immediately, in her own voice, with no regard for accuracy. The wolf would eat anything Leah ate. The wolf would grow up to be a guard. The practical implications were that the wolf would sleep on Leah's bed and not anybody else's. She announced these positions and then waited for them to be ratified. They were ratified. When Ellis went up to bed that night, the weight that had been sitting on her shoulders for weeks was distributed across 4 other people. It did not disappear, but the part of it that had belonged only to her had stopped being only hers. She felt the difference. She had not realized until the difference arrived how much she had been carrying. Palm slept on Leah's bed the first night, as ordered. She came back to Ellis's room before dawn. A few mornings later, Ellis was setting up to brew a wound salve. She had 2 piles of lily grass on the worktop. She had collected both piles from the same patch on the same trip. To her eye, they were identical. She selected the pile on the right because it was closer to her hand, and she started to reach for the first leaf. Palm, who had been curled on the corner of the desk watching her work, stood up. She walked across the desk. She put one small paw firmly on the back of Ellis's hand. Then, she nudged her hand away from the right pile with the side of her face, in the direction of the left pile. Ellis looked at her. Palm looked at the left pile. She looked at Ellis. She looked at the left pile again. Ellis asked her, mostly to amuse herself, whether she was sure. Palm sat down between Ellis's hand and the right pile. She considered arguing. She considered the fact that she had bought a wolf pup 3 days ago, and the wolf pup had now developed an opinion about her alchemy. She used the left pile. The extraction went faster than usual. The mana flow into the solution was unnaturally clean. Almost no impurities to settle out. The supernatant clear and bright. The salve at the end glowed a deeper green than any batch she had produced before. When she tested it on a small cut, the cut closed in less time than it had taken her to make it. She went back to the right pile. She held a leaf up to the light. It looked the same as the left pile's leaves. She closed her eyes and felt for the mana inside it. She held a leaf from the left pile next to it and did the same. The right pile's mana was sluggish. The left pile's mana was bright and circulating. The difference was small enough that she had not been able to see it without holding both at the same time. Palm, who had been watching her work this out, was now sitting upright with what one would describe in any other context as an expression of mild satisfaction. Ellis sat down on the floor beside the desk. She looked at the wolf pup who had cost her 3 silver coins in a back alley and had named herself in her sister's arms within an hour of arrival. She told her, quietly, that they were going to need to talk about what she actually was. Palm did not answer. She got up, walked across the desk, climbed down into Ellis's lap, and went to sleep. She let her sleep. The talk could wait. Ellis tested her properly the next day. She went to the garden with 3 different herbs and 1 clean cloth and 1 wolf pup who already understood, by Ellis's expression, that she had decided to take the previous morning seriously. She divided each herb into 2 piles by appearance. Same size, same number of leaves, same general shape. She had no way to tell the piles apart by sight. That was the point. She set out the first pair, lily grass. She asked Palm, in the way one asks a partner who does not speak, which one. Palm went directly to the left. Ellis made a salve from the left. It was visibly stronger than her standard batch. She did not need to test it on a cut to confirm. The color alone was deeper than the recipe described. She reset. Hilkendow root next, in 2 equal-looking ground piles. Palm indicated the right pile this time, after only a second of consideration. The blue-based solution, made from the right pile, was several shades richer than her baseline batches. Same recipe, same water, same hand. The only variable was which pile Ellis had used. She reset. Phantom mushroom shavings, which she had never worked with before, but had been carrying in a small twist of paper from a guild quest. 2 piles. Palm went left without hesitation. Ellis had no recipe for phantom mushroom yet, but she held both piles up to her face and closed her eyes and felt for the mana inside them. The right pile was sluggish. The left pile was bright and circulating, the way a small clean spring circulates compared to a stagnant puddle. She opened her eyes. She looked at Palm. Palm was sitting on the corner of the cloth, with her tail wrapped neatly around her paws, and an expression that had stopped pretending not to be smug. Ellis told her, out loud, that she was no longer a pet. Palm tilted her head once, accepting the promotion, and did not appear surprised. By the end of the morning, Ellis had reorganized her entire approach to alchemy around the new fact. Palm would select the materials. Ellis would do the work. The output ceiling she had been operating under, the ceiling defined by her inability to assess raw quality, had just been removed. They were going into the forest. They took a carriage to the edge of the forest. Mira drove. She had insisted on coming this far at minimum, on the grounds that a forest excursion was not the same as a guild quest, and that her father's 3 conditions did not specifically prohibit a maid sitting on a wagon at the tree line. Ellis did not argue. She said she would be back before the light started to turn, which was the rule they had inherited from before. Palm and she went in alone. They were going past the standard gathering zones, past where the F-rank quests sent novices, into a band of forest the guild rated as low D and worked only with parties of at least 3. Ellis had decided this was acceptable risk. Palm's ability, applied to genuinely wild materials at proper depth, would produce ingredients she could not buy at any price. The deeper they went, the more Palm pulled. She would stop at a lilygrass cluster Ellis would have stopped at, sniff it, and walk away. She would lead her 20 paces sideways to a different cluster, visually identical, growing in soil that looked the same, and stand there until Ellis knelt to harvest. She did this for lilygrass. She did this for Hilkendow. She found a phantom mushroom cluster Ellis would never have noticed at the foot of a hollow tree, and the mushrooms in that cluster had a faint silver sheen on the underside that the alchemy book described, but Ellis had never seen in person. By an hour past noon, her collection bag was full of materials of a quality she had previously thought existed only in the book's idealized example diagrams. She sat down on a fallen log to drink from her water flask. Palm sat beside her, tongue out, panting softly. She told her she had earned every meal Ellis was going to feed her for the rest of her life. Palm accepted the offer with a tail wag and went back to looking around. That was when the birds stopped singing. Palm went still. It was the kind of stillness that started before her body had finished deciding to do it. Her ears went forward, her nose lifted, her tail dropped flat against the log. Ellis had learned to read this in less than a week. Palm went still before things in the forest did anything important, and Palm had never been wrong about that yet. She stopped breathing as quietly as she could. A bush at the far edge of the clearing shook. A foul smell came across the open space. Sour, animal, wrong. Then the bush came apart and the orc stepped out. It was the size of a grown man and a half. Green skin pulled tight over heavy muscle, a pig flat nose, 2 yellow tusks, small dark eyes that were already calculating distance. It carried a club that was the wrong end of a small tree, banded with rusted iron, scarred at the head from previous use on things that had not survived the encounter. D rank, maybe higher, far above what an F-rank adventurer should be in a clearing with. It saw Palm first. Palm was the lower thing, the smaller thing, the one a hunting brain would mark as easy. It started toward her with the relaxed pace of an animal that had not yet decided whether to bother charging. Palm made a small sound, not a bark, just just a tight, unhappy breath, and pressed herself against the side of Ellis's leg. The math was very fast. She could try to run. The orc would catch one of them, probably Palm, possibly Ellis. Definitely whichever of them slowed for the other. She could try to distract it and break the other way. Same problem. Palm could not match her pace, and she was not going to leave her. She could fight it. F rank against D rank. The numbers were not on her side. The numbers had also not been on her side at the alchemy book, and at the guild door, and at the ruby potion. And she had stopped letting numbers be the thing that decided what she did. She stood up from the log. She did not draw the small utility knife at her belt. The knife was useless, and reaching for it would have been a tell. She let her hands hang loose at her sides. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second and felt for the warm thing in her chest. Palm looked up at her. She told her, very quietly, to stay behind her legs. The orc roared and started its run. Ellis had been practicing fire for months. The shape of a fireball, the size, the precision of the impact point. She could have placed a candle flame on a spider's back at 15 paces. She had not been practicing on D-rank hide. She sent the first fireball at the orc's right knee as it came in, apple-sized. Direct hit on the joint. The orc roared and stumbled. The impact had not penetrated the hide enough to disable, but it had broken the rhythm of the charge. The club came down where she had been standing a second earlier. She had moved. The original Ellis's body was small, and the small body was fast. 8 years old, low center of gravity. Weeks of running in the forest had made the legs reliable. She came up at the orc's flank. Second fireball, same size. She aimed at the right eye this time. The eye burst. The orc shrieked. The free hand went to its face. That was the moment she had to decide whether the third spell was going to be the same as the first two. The first two had been adequate, but not conclusive. Hide was thick. The orc was hurt, and angrier rather than hurt and slowing. A third fireball at the same caliber would let the fight continue, which gave the orc more swings, which meant more chances she would not move fast enough. She needed force. She needed penetration. She had been practicing fire alone. She had not been practicing combinations, but she had grown up in a world where combinations of physical principles were how problems were solved. Heat plus pressure equals cutting. Wind across flame equals spread. The mana was a medium. The principles applied. She gathered fire in her right palm and wind in her left and pushed them at each other. The wind compressed and accelerated the flame into a tight spinning column the size of a small log, a fire wind spiral. She had never tried it before. It held its shape for the second she needed it to hold. She drove it into the orc's center mass. The spiral hit and bored through, not stopped at the surface, through. Heat plus rotational kinetic force overcoming the natural resistance the way a drill overcomes a beam. The orc made one more sound, very brief, and then it stopped making sounds and went down sideways into the grass. And the grass under it caught fire briefly before the wind died and the flame with it. She stood in the clearing for a moment. Palm came out from behind her legs slowly. She walked over to the orc. She sniffed at it once. She turned and walked back to Ellis and sat down at the side of her left foot and leaned her shoulder against her shin. Ellis knelt down. She put one hand on the back of her neck. She told her she was all right. Palm told her, by the way she leaned harder, that she had already known Ellis would handle it, but that this had still been more interesting than she had wanted it to be. She sat there for another minute. She let her heartbeat come down. She let her hands stop shaking, which was a small thing they were doing that had not affected the spell, but was now permitted. Then she got up. She collected the orc's magic stone from inside the wound, a small dark crystal worth several silver at the guild, and she pried the two intact tusks loose from the lower jaw. She cleaned them on a patch of moss. She put them in her collection bag with the herbs. The fight was already over, and the materials still belonged to her. She started walking back toward the carriage. Mira was leaning against the side of the carriage with her arms crossed, and the kind of patience that was not actually patience. She straightened when Ellis came out of the tree line. Her eyes did the assessment her face did not perform, looking for blood, looking for tears, looking for missing pieces. Ellis had a small soot smear on one sleeve and a bag heavier than it had been. That was the visible damage. She walked up to her. She held out the bag. Mira looked into it. She looked at the bag. She looked at Ellis. She did not ask about the soot smear. "You are early," she said. "I finished what I went in for." Mira nodded. She did not ask for the rest. Ellis appreciated her for not asking. She would tell her tonight in her room with the door closed. What had happened, why it had happened, how she had handled it. The full report belonged to Mira. The carriage road was not the place. She helped Ellis up onto the carriage bench. Palm hopped up behind her and curled against her hip. Mira clicked the reins. The horse, which was old and not particularly impressed by anything, started forward at the only pace it knew. She watched the southern road unwind in the late light. The sun was a hand and a half above the horizon. They would be home before it touched the city wall. In her bag, she had ingredients for potions she had not yet tried to make. 2 orc tusks, worth a small bundle of silver, and a magic stone the color of cooled obsidian. In her chest, she had a piece of knowledge she had not had at breakfast. She had killed a D-rank monster, alone, with a wolf at her heel. The goddess, somewhere, was probably still tapping her clipboard. They would see how long that lasted. Several days after the orc, Ellis had 5 potions on Dorgan's counter. She had spent 5 nights making them, 1 a night, in the careful method she had taught herself. The forest hall Palm had selected became lilygrass and Hilkendale root and phantom mushroom of a quality she had never had access to. The philosopher's light gave her the catalyst. Her past life chemistry knowledge gave her the multi-effect emulsion theory she had been wanting to try since the first ruby batch. The result was emerald rather than ruby. The result combined healing, mana recovery, and, she had not planned this part, it had emerged from the phantom mushroom contribution, a mental stabilization effect that calmed the user's nerves enough to fight clearly. 5 vials. She had walked them to Dorgan's office at dawn, hooded, palm tucked inside her hood with her chin resting against her neck. Dorgan held 1 vial up to his monocle for a long 30 seconds. He set it back on the desk. He did not say anything. He went to a wall safe behind his chair, opened it, and counted out 100 silver coins into a leather purse, which he pushed across the desk. 20 silver each. It was a higher price than she had expected. She had been planning to ask for 15. Dorgan looked at her. He waited. She did not negotiate. He nodded. Master is doing fine work. He meant it the way he meant most things. Flat, unornamented, and final. He carried the vials out himself to the main floor a moment later to set them in the guild's controlled stock cabinet. The adventurers at the round tables noticed. The aura coming off 5 emerald vials at once was harder to miss than the aura off one. The murmur started before Dorgan had even closed the cabinet door. She followed him out. She had the silver purse in her hand and a wolf in her hood, and she was about to walk out of the guild for the morning when the front doors banged open. A man in royal courier livery walked in, parchment in hand, and went straight to the public quest board. The murmur in the hall died. The herald pinned the parchment to the center of the board. He stepped back. He read aloud, in the formal reading voice royal heralds used, exactly what was written on it. The Lord Rutos of the Lazaral Duke family had been struck down by an unknown illness. The kingdom's physicians and priests had been unable to identify a treatment. The condition was worsening. His Grace the Duke offered substantial reward, wealth, honor, formal recognition to any party able to diagnose and cure the affliction. Any further information could be obtained from the guildmaster. The herald turned and walked back out. The doors closed behind him. The hall did not move for several seconds. Then the murmur became a different kind of murmur. Speculation, calculation, the beginnings of bid counting. Some of the adventurers were already weighing the reward against the political risk of taking on a duke's heir and failing. A failed cure attempt on a noble child could have its own kinds of consequences. Most of them, after about 10 seconds, decided the math did not work for them. Ellis had stopped moving when the herald said the name, Lazaral. The word landed in the part of her chest she had been ignoring for weeks. The bookstore, the 2 academy girls, the casual sentence about the Lazaral rival's son being mysteriously ill. The flicker of unease, she had decided, was not her problem. It was apparently going to be her problem now. She knew this because Dorgan was looking at her, not at the room, not at the parchment, at her, across the floor of his own guild, with the kind of slow, deliberate attention a man uses when he is about to ask something he is not sure he has any right to ask. He raised one finger and pointed silently toward his office door. She went. Dorgan closed the door. He sat down. He did not invite her to sit. There was only the one chair in the office, and it was his. He came at the question sideways. He told her, first, that the guild had its own information network, that adventurers passing through every village brought rumors back, and that the guild had been tracking the Lazaral boy's illness for months before the herald made it public. He told her the kingdom's senior physicians had run out of options weeks ago. He told her the senior priests had run out of prayers a week after that. He told her that what was left, officially, was the herald and the reward and the long, quiet wait for the boy to die. What was left unofficially, he said, was him asking her a question he had no right to ask, and her being free to refuse. He pulled 2 thick bundles from a drawer, parchment, tied with cord, dusty along the edges, confidential medical records, physician notes, priest examinations, and one document Ellis recognized only because of the diagram on its cover, which was a wave pattern recorded by a court mage's specialized instrument, a magical waveform, the kind of equipment ordinary alchemists did not have access to and did not know how to read. He told her he wanted her to take the records to her master. He did not phrase it as the guildmaster answer to a guild adventurer. He phrased it as Dorgan Blasthammer, personally, asking a child if her unconventional teacher might see something the rest of the kingdom had missed. He told her he would not be offended if she came back tomorrow with a no. He also told her, more quietly, that Duke Alba's faction had grown stronger every month for the last 5 years, and that the Lazarel family was the only counterweight large enough to slow him. If the Lazarel heir died, the counterweight collapsed. If the heir lived, there was at least the possibility that the kingdom did not fall entirely into one man's pocket. He did not say any of this to manipulate her. He said it because he did not want to pretend the request was smaller than it was. She looked at the bundles. She looked at Dorgan. She looked briefly at Palm, who was tucked against her collarbone, watching the conversation with her ears forward. She told him she would take the records to her master. She picked up the bundles. They were heavier than they looked. She tucked them inside the cloak's inner pocket, along the lining where the silver had been earlier in the day. The cloak became a different shape under the weight. Dorgan walked her to the door. He did not say good luck. He said one thing only, and he said it without ceremony. Whatever happens, he said, you came to me with this, not anybody else. Remember that. She nodded. She walked out. The sky was overcast. She walked home with the records pressed against her ribs and a feeling in her stomach that was not fear and not hope, and could not yet be named. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long time before she opened them. Palm was on the desk, sitting upright, watching the parchment the way she watched the door when somebody she did not know was approaching the house. She had never seen Ellis carry something like this. She knew, in the way she knew small things, that whatever was in the parchment had changed the air in the room. The bag of 100 silver was on the dresser. It looked smaller than it had felt at the guild. A noble heir was dying somewhere across the city, and Ellis was sitting in a bedroom in the slums with 100 silver coins and a stack of paper that nobody else in the kingdom had been able to read correctly. She thought about the math. If she succeeded, the Lazarel family owed her a debt, a real one, the kind a duke pays, the kind that could rearrange the entire shape of her family's situation. If she failed, she was an 8-year-old apprentice claiming to be the agent of a master nobody had ever met, who had failed to cure a duke's son the kingdom's best could not save. The cover story would not survive that kind of failure. Neither, possibly, would Dorgan's career. Neither, possibly, would her family. The math was lopsided in both directions. Palm got down off the desk. She walked over to the bed. She put both small front paws on Ellis's knee. She looked up at her with a face that was not quite asking a question. She picked her up. She held her against her chest. She told her quietly that they were going to read. She sat down at the desk. She opened the first bundle. The records were exhaustive. 23 physicians, 11 priests, 2 court alchemists. Every one of them had reached the same conclusion in slightly different language, which was that they did not understand the illness, that no treatment they had tried had worked, and that the boy's condition was deteriorating on a timeline measured now in weeks rather than months. The illness presented as periodic high fever, intermittent convulsions, clouded consciousness, and an inability to hold mana stably enough to perform even basic exercises. The body was healthy by every observable measure. The blood was clean. The bones were sound. There was no infection any priest could detect. There was no curse any mage could trace. By the time Ellis reached the third physician's report, she had begun to suspect they were all describing the same thing wrong. Then she found the waveform diagram. A court mage had recorded the boy's mana wave with an instrument the rest of the country apparently did not have. The diagram was technical. The wave was supposed to look like a smooth oscillating line. The boy's wave looked like a smooth oscillating line buried in noise. Fine, irregular fluctuations breaking the curve at unpredictable intervals. The way static breaks a radio signal. She sat very still. She had seen this pattern before. Not in this world, in the world she had died in. A chemistry professor, in a cross-disciplinary lecture she had attended in her second year, had described electromagnetic hypersensitivity, a condition in which a person's nervous system was triggered by faint electrical fields produced by ordinary appliances, fields no one else could feel. Most modern medicine had concluded the syndrome did not exist. The professor's argument had been that even if the condition itself was psychosomatic, the underlying physical phenomenon, environmental electromagnetic noise, was real and worth understanding. This was not electromagnetic hypersensitivity. This was its magical equivalent. The capital had been adopting magical tools for the last decade. Street lamps, stoves, communication crystals. Each one emitted a faint magical noise field as a byproduct of operation, undetectable to ordinary mages because it was below the threshold of conscious perception. To anyone with normal sensitivity, the noise was nothing. shocking to a person born with extreme magical sensitivity, and the boy's family was old high nobility, the kind of bloodline that produced occasional outliers. The noise was a constant low-grade overload that the body's mana system could not filter. The boy's mana wave was not noisy because he was sick. The boy's mana wave was noisy because he was, neurologically, a magical antenna picking up a citywide signal nobody had measured. She sat back in the chair. She had a name for it. She called it magic dissonance, and she wrote the name on a clean sheet of paper and underlined it twice. The cause did not save the boy. The cause was the easy part. Now she needed to design a treatment that filtered the magical noise without disrupting the boy's own mana flow, which meant she needed three things: a sedative-style component to calm the overfiring receptors, a stabilizing component to hold his mana in a clean baseline, and a filter component to attenuate ambient noise, specifically while leaving genuine signal intact. The first two she could find. The third was going to be the problem. Pom was asleep on her desk by then, curled against the silver scales of the diagram. The candle was almost out. The next part of the work was going to take more than one night. She worked the problem for a week. The sedative component was easy. The silence mushroom, a fungal ingredient with sound-dampening alchemical properties documented in 2 of her reference books, was the standard answer. It would calm the overfiring. The stabilizing component was harder but solvable. Moonstone powder, a luxury alchemical reagent she would need to buy from a high-end gem merchant, would hold the mana baseline. The filter component was a wall. She read every alchemy reference she could afford or borrow. She read every herb encyclopedia. She asked Pom to sniff every dried specimen she owned, on the chance that one of them had a property she had not noted. She worked by analogy from past life chemistry. What would behave like a magical low-pass filter? What would attenuate noise while preserving signal? And matched the analogies against this world's known materials. There was no match. The reason was structural. This world's alchemy did not have the concept of magical noise as a category because no one in this world had built equipment sensitive enough to measure it. The treatment paradigm did not include filtering because the diagnostic paradigm did not include the kind of pollution that needed filtering. The materials that would do what she needed were not cataloged because nobody had ever needed to catalog them. By the end of the week, she had 3 full notepads of crossed out candidates and 1 terrible certainty. The third ingredient might exist somewhere in the world, but it was not in any shop or library she had access to. She sat at the desk with her forehead resting on her forearms. The Lazaral boy had weeks, maybe. She had run out of places to look. Pom nudged her arm. She did not lift her head right away. Pom nudged again, harder, the side of her face against the inside of her elbow until she had to look at her. Pom was sitting on the desk. She was looking at her with a specific intentness Ellis had learned to read. Whenever Pom looked at her like this, it meant she had something to show her, and she did not have the words to do it. She wanted Ellis to ask the right question. She sat up slowly. She had been working with Pom long enough by then to know the trick was to demonstrate. Pom understood mana signatures. If Ellis could produce the signature she was looking for, even in caricature, Pom could match it against signatures she had encountered. She gathered ordinary mana in her left palm. She deliberately destabilized it, letting it run rough and dirty, the way the boy's wave looked in the diagram. Magical noise. She held it out so Pom could see and feel it. Then she gathered Philosopher's Light in her right palm. She passed the dirty mana through it. The Philosopher's Light took the noise out, pulled the irregular fluctuations clean, and let the smooth signal through unchanged. A working filter, in miniature, demonstrated by hand. The kind of effect she needed an alchemical material to perform on the inside of a person's mana system continuously. She held both hands out. She asked Pom, quietly, whether she had ever encountered a material that smelled like this. Pom watched the demonstration carefully. Then she barked once, a small clean affirmative, and walked across the desk, climbed down, and went to the window. She stood up on her hind legs against the sill. She put one paw against the glass and pointed. The window faced east. East was the road out of the capital. East was the road to the southern forest. She held the paw against the glass without moving. Ellis looked at her for a long time. She had spent a week deciding the third ingredient did not exist in any market she could reach. Pom, who could not read and could not speak, was telling her that what she needed had a smell, and that the smell was not in the city. She closed the books on the desk. She capped the inkwell. She blew out the candle. She told her, quietly, that they would go in the morning. Pom came down off the windowsill, walked over, and curled up against the pillow like the matter had been settled. Ellis lay down beside her. The despair that had been sitting in her chest for the last several hours was not gone, but it had moved over enough to make room beside it for something smaller and harder to name. Not hope, exactly. The absence of being completely out of moves. She went to sleep. The apothecary district opened before dawn for the customers who did not want to be seen. Ellis went at first light. Palm was tucked inside her hood. The street was empty except for the kind of foot traffic that pretended not to be foot traffic. Couriers, runners, men carrying small parcels they did not want anyone to remember. She knew which shop she needed because she had read the guild's material registry the night before. The shop did not have a sign. The door was a heavy wooden one with no handle on the outside. She knocked twice and waited. The shopkeeper opened the door after a long pause. He was an old man with one eye where there was supposed to be two, and the empty socket had not been covered with anything because he had decided that intimidating people was easier than vanity. He looked down at her without surprise. He sold to children sometimes. The kind of children he sold to were rarely buying for themselves. She asked for silence mushroom, highest grade. He gestured at a tray on the counter. 12 mushrooms, all the same species, slightly varied in size and the deepness of the cap. He told her, in a voice that had stopped getting interested in customers years ago, that they were all silence mushroom. He asked which one she wanted. The trick, the registry had warned her, was that he did not sell low-grade specimens at full price. He tested. She closed her eyes. She felt for the warm thing in her chest and let a small thread of it extend outward, the way she had learned to do for material assessment in the previous month. The mushrooms had different mana signatures. Most were dim, stagnant, slightly murky, the kind of weak resonance that meant they had been picked too late or stored too long. One in the back corner of the tray was different, bright, clean. The sound-dampening property was almost audible to her mana sense as a kind of quiet ringing. She opened her eyes. She pointed at the corner mushroom. The shopkeeper did not move for a moment. Then he pulled the tray toward himself, picked up the corner specimen, and held it under the lamp. He grunted. He looked at her again. The remaining eye narrowed. "That one came in this morning," he said. "Special root, fresh." She waited. He turned it in his fingers. He set it back on the counter in front of her. He told her the price. He named it at half the market rate because the deal was the deal, and a buyer who could read mana that well was a buyer he wanted coming back. She paid. She tucked the mushroom into a small padded box from inside her cloak. She thanked him briefly and left. Palm shifted in the hood as Ellis stepped back into the street. They had one of three. The gem merchant in the noble district was the easy stop. The shop was clean and quiet, and the clerk was a young man who treated her hooded silhouette with the polite indifference of a man trained never to ask why a customer looked the way they did. She asked for moonstone powder, highest grade. He produced a small velvet pouch from a locked drawer and weighed out 3 measures on a brass scale. He told her the price. She paid 3 silver from the purse Dorgan had given her. The clerk thanked her. She left. That was the easy one. The next 4 hours were not easy. She went to every alchemical herb shop in the capital. She started with the high-end ones in the noble district and worked her way down to the back alley operations near the river. She had Palm in her hood at every stop. The protocol was the same. She would describe the property she needed, the shopkeepers would frown and shake their heads, or offer her the closest analog they sold, and she would hold the offered material out so Palm could sniff it through a small gap in her hood. Every time, Palm turned her face away. By midday, Ellis had been to 17 shops. The bell in the central square rang noon. She was standing outside the last one she had not yet tried, with her back against a wall and her hood pulled forward to hide her face from the lunch crowd, and she had nothing. Palm shifted in the hood. She tugged at her collar with one tooth, gently. She pressed her face against the side of her jaw and turned it, deliberately, in the direction of the eastern gate. The southern forest was past the eastern gate. Ellis had ridden in a carriage to that forest twice. Both times Mira had driven. Both times she had stayed within the marked F-rank zones. Palm was not pointing at the F-rank zones now. Palm was pointing at the deeper section, the one Ellis had crossed for the orc, and possibly past that. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then she straightened up. She walked to the carriage rental near the eastern gate. She rented a small cart and the oldest horse they had, the one nobody else wanted, which suited her because the rate was low and the horse was unlikely to bolt at anything. She was on the road within the hour. The cart went as far as the cart could go. She tied the horse loosely to a tree at a point where the road petered out into a foot track. She left a small bag of grain near her, in case she was longer than she planned. She lifted Palm out of her hood and set her on the ground. Palm immediately put her nose against the foot track and started forward. She followed. The path went south, then bent east. They left the part of the forest the guild's quest map covered and entered the part with no markers and no patrol routes. The trees grew taller. The undergrowth grew thicker. The light got greener. Palm did not hesitate. She moved with the certainty of an animal that had been to this exact spot before and was retracing a route. Ellis had not asked her, before they left the city, how she knew about a dungeon outside the southern forest's standard zones. She had decided she did not need to. The track record was complete. They walked for nearly 2 hours. The light shifted from afternoon to late afternoon. The forest got quieter. The birds thinned out, then disappeared entirely, the way they did near things they had decided to leave alone. She kept one hand near her belt. She had brought the small utility knife, more out of habit than expectation. Her real defense was the spell she had learned to cast with her left hand at the orc. Palm stopped at the base of a low rise. She looked up. Above her, half buried in moss and creeping vines, was a doorway carved into the hillside, stone, ancient. The kind of door that had been built by hands the kingdom had no records of and had been left here long enough that the forest had nearly finished swallowing it. A dungeon entrance, unregistered, not on any guild map. Ellis stood at the base of the rise for a long moment. Palm walked up to the doorway and turned around to face her. She was waiting. She had two choices. She could turn around and tell Dorgan she had failed. She could go in. She went in. The inside of the dungeon was wrong in a way that took her several minutes to identify. It was wrong because it was not wrong. It was clean. It was empty. There were no traps, no monsters, no signs of the ordinary dungeon ecosystem the guild's reference text described. Palm moved through it without alarm. She stopped at a section of wall in the third corridor. She scratched at it with one paw, twice, deliberately. The wall was hollow. Ellis gathered fire in her palm, small, precise, the way she had learned to make it for the training dummy, and she touched it to the seam Palm had found. The stone was thinner here than it looked. The flame found the weak point. The wall came apart in 3 slabs. Behind it was a chamber she did not have words for at first. The cavern was wide and high and dark, except for the bioluminescent moss across its ceiling, which cast a soft pale green light over everything below. At the center of the cavern was a still underground lake, water so flat that the moss above showed in it perfectly, doubled, the way a mirror doubles a candle. In the middle of the lake was a small, low island. The island was covered, inch to inch, in white flowers she had never seen before. She let herself stand there for one long breath of pure stillness. Then Palm stepped past her onto the lake's edge and into the shallow water. She followed. The lake was cold and rose only to her mid-thigh at its deepest. Palm led her to the island in a path that avoided 2 slightly deeper holes she would not have seen on her own. She climbed onto the island after her. The flowers were waist-high to her. They smelled faintly of something she could not name. Clean, dry, not floral exactly. Palm walked through the flower bed without crushing any. She stopped at one specific bloom near the center. It was no different from the others by sight. By mana sense, it was an entirely different specimen. The signature was a quiet, layered, exact resonance that matched, almost note for note, the filter pattern Ellis had demonstrated with her hand on Palm's desk, the dream flower. She named it that in her head as she knelt to harvest it, because the alchemy book had no name for it, and the world had no name for it, and she needed something to call the thing. She cut the stem with the small utility knife. She wrapped the bloom in a soft cloth. She tucked it into the inner padded box, against the silence mushroom and the moonstone pouch. They waded back. They climbed out. They left the cavern the way they had come, and the dungeon let them leave the way it had let them enter, silently, without challenge. By the time they got back to the cart, the sky beyond the trees was the color of cooling iron. They made it home before full dark. She did not start the brew when they got home. She had read enough about high-precision alchemy by then to know that the cure could not be made by a person who had been on her feet for 16 hours and whose hands were still slightly cold from a forest lake. The materials were on the desk. The materials would still be on the desk in 2 hours after she had eaten and sat down and stilled her breathing. She ate, she sat. She cleaned every tool she was going to use, with a care that bordered on ritual. The iron pot, the stone mortar, the small glass beakers, the wooden stirring rod. She set magic stones at the 4 corners of the room and activated a basic suppression barrier the alchemy book described. the kind that contained sound and mana fluctuations from leaving a workspace. Mira would not hear. The family would not feel anything unusual. Palm sat on the corner of the desk through all of this. She did not interfere. She watched. When the room was ready, Ellis sat down in front of the cloth with the 3 ingredients: the silence mushroom in its padded box, the moonstone pouch beside it, the wrapped dream flower at the center. 1 vial, 1 chance. If the brew failed, there was no second flower in the city, no second mushroom of that grade until the wholesaler's next special route, no replacement timeline that arrived before Rutos did not. She closed her eyes. She did the meditation the book described, pushing fear out, pushing impatience out, pushing the picture of the boy out, until there was only the work and the materials and her hands. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer 8 years old in the part of herself she needed to use. She started. Step 1 was the base. She poured purified water into the iron pot. She activated the magic circle beneath it, a heating glyph calibrated for sub-boiling temperature. Not the rough open-fire heat of basic alchemy, but the precise warmth of a chemistry water bath. The water heated. It did not bubble. She added the silence mushroom, ground fine in the mortar by careful pinches. The water turned a deep indigo. The smell was earthy and faintly cool. She stirred with a thread of mana, gently, dissolving the sound-dampening compounds without bruising them. Impurities, fibers, cellular debris settled at the bottom of the pot. She separated them off cleanly. The remaining liquid was a clean, translucent indigo. Step 1 was done. Step 2 was the moonstone. She added the moonstone powder slowly, a small spoonful at a time. The first spoonful behaved. The second spoonful behaved. The third spoonful did not. The indigo and the moonstone began to fight in the pot. A small, fast, escalating reaction. The indigo's static dampening property and the moonstone's dynamic stabilizing property running in opposite directions and refusing to share the same medium. The pot vibrated against the desk. She stopped. She withdrew all the mana she had in the brew. The reaction slowed. The vibration eased. Past life chemistry surfaced. The professor again, the same one who had explained the bridging principle on the night she had brewed the first ruby potion. He had taught a class once on emulsifiers, substances that allowed 2 normally incompatible compounds to share a stable suspension by coating each particle in a thin compatibilizing film. She needed a coating. She needed it at the level of the individual mana particles in the mixture. She broke a small portion of her own ordinary mana into the finest mist she could control, almost vapor, almost nothing, and she introduced it slowly, letting it coat the moonstone particles and the mushroom particles individually as it spread through the brew. The fight in the pot slowed. The 2 forces stopped repelling and began to coexist, suspended around the bridging mana. The liquid stabilized to deep sapphire with small specks of moonstone catching the candlelight like distant stars. Step 2 was done. She rested her hands on the edge of the desk for 30 seconds. She checked Palm. Palm had not moved. Her ears were forward. Step 3 was the dream flower. She unwrapped the flower from the cloth. She held it over the brew for a moment, letting the mana signature meet the brew's surface. The reaction was instant. The flower's filter property and the brew's combined energies hit each other in a flash of pure white light that blew out 2 of the 4 corner candles and made the entire pot ring like struck glass. The brew was about to break. She had less than a second. She gathered the philosopher's light in her right palm, the gold catalyst, the rarest version of herself she had, and drove it down into the brew, not as a force, but as an interface. The gold spread between the flower and the suspension. It did not push either of them. It built a place where both could exist at the same time. The brew calmed in stages. The white light receded. The brew shifted color through several values: indigo, emerald, gold, and settled, finally, into a single liquid the color of an aurora. Pale pink at one angle, pale gold at another, soft green in the middle. It glowed with a steady, gentle internal light. She held the pot's edge. Her hands were shaking. Palm was sitting up on the desk now, ears straight forward, watching the aurora. She poured the liquid into one small vial. She capped it. She set it on the desk between them. She had a cure. She sat down on the floor against the side of the bed. Palm climbed down off the desk and crawled into her lap. The candles she had not lost flickered low. Outside, somewhere across the capital, Rudolfslasser was probably still alive. She closed her eyes for what she told herself would be a moment. She slept where she sat. Ellis woke on the floor. The candles had burned out. The vial on the desk was still there. The aurora light inside it had not faded. Pale pink at one angle, pale gold at another, soft green in the middle, exactly as she had left it. The cure had survived the night. She checked her hands. They had stopped shaking. She had slept maybe 3 hours. It was enough. She stood. She splashed cold water on her face from the pitcher on the dresser. She changed into a clean dress. She wrapped the vial in a soft cloth and put it inside the inner cloak pocket against her chest. She checked it twice. Palm was already at the door, ears forward, waiting. She told her they were going. She left a folded note on the kitchen table for Mira, saying she had gone to the guild on a matter that could not wait, and that she would explain when she got home. She left through the back door. The street outside was gray and empty. The light was just beginning to find the eastern roofs. She walked fast. She did not run, because a child running through the capital before dawn attracts the kind of attention she could not afford. But she walked at the edge of what walking allowed. Palm kept pace beside her. She had stopped trotting and started running flat, long, low strides that ate ground silently. She had been adjusting her speed for Ellis before, Ellis realized. She could move faster when she chose to. The guild was open. She had not expected that. The lanterns inside were still lit. Dorgan, when she came through the door, was already standing at the counter in shirt sleeves with his coat off and 3 open ledgers in front of him, and he looked up at her as though he had been listening for the sound of the door for the last several hours. He had not slept. Mimi was at her usual spot, eyes red, fur visibly mussed. She had been up too. She made an exhausted noise when she saw Ellis come in, then straightened. She went past her to Dorgan. She unwrapped the cloth on the vial and set the vial on his counter. He looked at it. He picked it up. He held it to one of the dimming lanterns and watched the aurora shift through pink and gold and green inside the glass for what felt like 10 seconds and was probably less. He set it down. He told Mimi to send a runner to the Lazar mansion immediately and to inform the Duke's household that the guildmaster was on his way, by his own authority, with an urgent matter relating to the herald's announcement. He told her to have the runner say nothing else. Mimi was already moving. He pulled his coat back on. He checked his belt for the heavy iron token that meant guildmaster in person. He picked up the vial again, very carefully, and tucked it into a small padded compartment inside his coat that Ellis had not realized was there. He looked at her. "You come too," he said. "You explain." Ellis had been planning to. She nodded. He went to the front door. He held it open for her. Palm went out first. Ellis followed. They hit the street. Dorgan started running. Ellis had not understood, until that moment, what dwarven physiology actually meant. He moved at a pace that was not jogging and was not walking, and was somewhere on the side of running where the rhythm was steady and the wind was the limit. He did not slow for her. He did not need to. After about 3 streets, she realized Palm was matching him without effort, and she was the one falling behind. He swung her up onto his shoulder with one arm and kept going. She held on. The capital streamed past. Narrow streets giving way to wider boulevards, the slums giving way to the merchant district, giving way to the noble quarter, and she had a vial against her ribs and a guildmaster under her legs, and the sun was coming up over the eastern wall. Palm ran beside them. Her tongue was out. She looked, somehow, entertained. The Lazar mansion was the size of 3 of the von Abend houses, end to end, and twice as tall. Polished white stone. Tall iron gates with the family crest in the spike pattern. 2 guards in formal armor flanking the gate. Halberds upright. The kind of stillness that meant they had been told the household was not receiving visitors today, and that they were to enforce that without exception. Dorgan set Ellis down at the gate. He straightened his coat. He addressed the guards by name and rank, and identified himself, because he knew them, and because the name Dorgan Blasthammer was supposed to mean something at noble doors. The guards refused. Polite refusal. Strict orders. The household was in crisis. No visitors, no exceptions, no appointments would be honored today, regardless of credentials. Their faces did not move. Dorgan started to argue. The argument was the wrong argument. The head butler appeared from inside the gate. He was a tall, older man with gray hair pulled into a tight queue at the nape of his neck, and a face that had spent the last several months turning charlatans away from his employer's door. He addressed Dorgan with formal courtesy. He acknowledged Dorgan's rank. He restated the household's position. He suggested Dorgan submit his information through formal channels. He did not look at Ellis. She stepped past Dorgan. She told the butler, not loudly, but in a voice with no uncertainty in it, that they had a treatment that addressed the actual cause of the young lord's illness, that the cause had been correctly identified for the first time, that the treatment would lose its effectiveness if it was held outside the patient's presence past noon, and that he had 2 choices. He could go inside and inform the Duke directly that they were here, or he could be the man who had told the Duke afterward that the cure had been at his gate and he had turned it away. The butler stopped looking past her. He looked at her. He did not look at Dorgan again. He turned and went inside. They waited. Dorgan did not say anything. The guards did not move. Pom sat down at Ellis's left foot and leaned her shoulder into her ankle. The butler came back out 3 minutes later with the Duke behind him. Duke Aldous de Rasoul looked like a man who had not slept in a week and had stopped pretending he might. His hair was uncombed. His shirt was open at the collar. His eyes had the specific flat brightness of a man holding himself together by will and protocol. He had come to the gate himself. The fact that he had come to the gate himself was already an answer to whether he was prepared to listen. He looked at Dorgan. He looked at Ellis. He looked at Pom. She did not wait for him to speak. She told him, briefly and directly, what she knew. The illness was magic dissonance, environmental magical noise from the city's new tools overwhelming his son's hypersensitive constitution. The cure was a 3-component potion that calmed the overfiring, stabilized the mana baseline, and filtered the ambient noise. She had it with her. She could explain the mechanism in detail at the bedside. She asked him to allow her to administer it. She told him, last, that if the treatment harmed his son, her life was forfeit. He could collect on it however he chose. She was 8 years old. She said it without ornament. The Duke looked at her for a long second. He looked at Dorgan. Dorgan met his eyes and did not look away. The Duke turned to the head butler. He said one word. The butler stepped back. The guards stepped aside. The Duke gestured for them to come through the gate. They went through. The room smelled of herbs and oil, and a faint, chaotic mana residue Ellis could feel through the soles of her feet. Rutos lay in the canopied bed at the center of the room. He was perhaps 13. Long silver hair against the pillow, pale enough that his lips had gone gray, eyelids twitching with the small, constant motion that indicated convulsions held just below the surface. His breathing was shallow. His mana waveform, she could feel it in the air around him, matched the diagram in the records exactly. Smooth signal, buried in noise. The static was constant. The doctors at the wall began objecting before she had crossed the room. They objected to the introduction of an untrained outsider. They objected to the unknown substance. They objected to the child. The Duke looked at them once and they stopped. She unwrapped the vial. She set it on the bedside table. She did the explanation while she prepared the small dropper from inside her cloak. 3 causes, 3 components. The silence mushroom calmed the nervous system's overfiring. The moonstone powder stabilized the mana baseline so the boy could hold a clean signal. The 3rd component, she did not give it a public name because the cover story was already gone, but the dream flower's location did not need to be, filtered the ambient magical noise without disrupting his own mana flow. She described the mechanism. The doctors did not understand it. The Duke did not need to. She lifted Rudos's head carefully with one hand. She drew the aurora liquid into the dropper. She administered it drop by drop into his lips, watching the swallow reflex carry each one down. 8 drops. Then she capped the vial and laid his head back on the pillow. She stepped away from the bed. She told the Duke the effect would take time. She did not say how much time, because she did not know. She told him the magical waveform should begin to stabilize within minutes if the cure was working. The room was very quiet. The Duke was at the bedside. His hands were folded against the edge of the canopy frame. His knuckles were white. Nobody breathed. The waveform changed first. She felt it before anyone else in the room. The constant static began to thin. The smooth signal underneath came up through it, clearer in patches at first, then clearer in longer stretches, until the static had dropped to a level that any healer with a basic appraisal lens could measure. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second to confirm. The boy's mana wave was converging on a clean baseline. His breathing changed next, deeper, slower. The panicked, shallow rhythm replaced by the rhythm of a body that had stopped fighting itself. The color came back into his face in stages. His eyelids stopped twitching. They stayed still for a long second. He opened them. He was looking at the ceiling. He was disoriented. He looked from the ceiling to the side, where his father stood. He worked his mouth twice before sound came out of it. Father. The room broke open. The Duke was at the bedside before the word had finished, both hands holding his son's face. The head butler was beside him. The doctors were crowding forward, talking over each other, instruments out, calling readings. One of the maids was crying without sound. The other was kneeling beside the bed, hands over her mouth. Ellis had stepped back from the bedside while the waveform was clearing. She was standing against the far wall now. Nobody had noticed. She was not part of this. The cover story she had walked in with was that she was an agent. The truth she had walked in with was that she was an unaffiliated child alchemist with no rank blank and no name in the rooms that mattered. Either way, the reunion belonged to a father and a son. Either way, she did not have standing to stand at that bed. She slipped out of the room. The corridor outside was empty. The maids had left their stations to go inside. She leaned against the wall opposite the door. She closed her eyes for 1 second to let the muscles in her back stop holding everything they had been holding. Behind her, somewhere down the corridor, small feet hit the carpet at a run. Palm rounded the corner at full pace. She had been left behind in the entry hall. She had heard the room shift the way Ellis had felt it shift, and she had come to find her. She did not stop until she was against her legs. She put both front paws on her knees and looked up. She knelt down. She picked her up. She held her against her chest with both arms. The room she had just left was full of noise. The corridor was completely silent. She was aware of the silence, the way one is aware of a temperature change when one walks between rooms. She had saved a Duke's son. The Duke did not know her name yet. The doctors did not know her name yet. The boy did not know her name. Whether she was about to be acknowledged or quietly compensated and shown out the back door was, at that moment, an entirely open question. Palm pressed her face against the side of her neck. She sat down on the floor in the corridor with the wolf in her lap, against the wall, beside the open door of a room where a noble heir had just opened his eyes for the first time in weeks. She waited to see what the Duke was going to do next. The head butler came to fetch them perhaps 20 minutes later. He had cleaned himself up in the interval. The queue at the back of his neck retied. The silver laser pin straightened on the lapel. He bowed very slightly when he saw Ellis on the floor of the corridor with Palm in her lap. She had the impression he had not bowed to anyone shorter than his belt buckle in a long time. "My lady," he said, "His Grace requests your presence." He led them to a sitting room at the far end of the same floor. The room was larger than her entire mansion. Gilded chairs, a polished oak table with a silver tea service on it, tall windows letting in late morning light that made the gold on the chair backs catch and turn briefly into something closer to fire. Dorgan was already there, standing beside one of the chairs with his arms folded, looking faintly uncomfortable in the way large men look uncomfortable in rooms designed for smaller, quieter occupants. The Duke entered a moment after they did. He had washed his face. He had buttoned his shirt at the collar. He had not yet put on the silver cravat that should have completed the noble dress, because he had run out of energy for ceremony at the same moment his son had opened his eyes, and he had decided which mattered more. He walked to where Ellis was standing. He did not sit. He bowed. It was not the courtesy bow a noble offers to another noble. It was the deeper one a person offers when they have been given something they do not know how to repay. Dorgan watched it. The head butler watched it. Ellis watched it. The Duke straightened. He thanked her for her master's work. He used the formal phrasing that the Lasser ducal house owed a debt to the alchemist whose intermediary she had been, and that he wished to extend that debt to her personally as the courier of the cure. He asked, very respectfully, when he might meet her master. She produced the cover story one more time. The reclusive alchemist in the southern forest, the cabin near the stream, the man who avoided cities, the man who had no apprentices and had not asked her to share his name. She delivered all of it cleanly. The Duke listened the way a man listens when he is being given an answer he is going to test. He thanked her again. He told her he would be honored to make the journey himself if she would consent to act as guide. That was when Dorgan stepped forward. He looked at Palm, who was still in Ellis's arms. He addressed her in his ordinary blunt voice by name. "Palm," he said, "who actually made the potion." The room held very still. Palm, in Ellis's arms, yawned once. She turned her head. She looked deliberately up at her. She did not bark. She did not move from her arms. She simply looked, and the look was the answer. The Duke's expression moved through several states in less than 2 seconds. Dorgan did not give Ellis time to recover. He kept going while her hands were still adjusting to being seen. He told the Duke, in a few short sentences, what he had been holding back for weeks, that Ellis von Abend had walked into his guild months earlier and presented a recovery potion of impossible quality, and another, that she had explained the nature of the boy's illness with the precision of a person who understood it from inside the system, not from outside, that the cover story about a forest master had been transparent to him from the second she delivered it, and he had honored it because keeping her safe had served the same purposes as keeping the supply line open. The Duke had been looking at Dorgan while he spoke. When Dorgan stopped, the Duke looked at Ellis. He did not look angry. He did not look impressed in the way men look impressed when they have been shown a trick. He looked like a man who had been handed a piece of a puzzle and was rearranging the rest of his picture to fit it. He apologized. Not for the deception, he understood the deception. He apologized for not having seen her earlier as the person who had written the explanation he had heard in his son's sick room. He apologized in the formal phrasing again, the kind reserved for a debt acknowledged to the actual debtor instead of to a proxy. She did not perform relief. She was 8 years old and she had just spent 6 weeks holding a story that had cost her sleep. And now the story was on the floor of a noble sitting room, and the Duke was looking at her through the place where the story had been. The relief was real. She did not let it show. She told him, briefly, why the cover had been necessary. The danger Dorgan had named the day she sold him the first potion. The kind of attention an extraordinary supply attracted from the kind of people who did not ask permission. He nodded. He understood that part too. He thanked her. Just her, this time. Not the master. Her. He asked the head butler and Dorgan to leave the room. He needed, he said, a private word with Lady von Abend. Dorgan looked at her before he went. His expression was the same expression he had worn at his office desk months earlier when he had counted the first 10 silver coins onto the wood between them. Steady, unsurprised. The look of a man who had been waiting for the moment that had now arrived. The head butler followed him out. The door closed. The Duke and Ellis were alone, except for Palm in her arms, who had decided the meeting was now interesting enough to stay awake for. The Duke sat down across from her. He sat slowly, the way a man sits when he is deciding whether to tell something he has been carrying for a long time. Palm shifted in her lap. She waited. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he asked, very quietly, whether she was the daughter of Reed von Abend. She had not been expecting the name. She felt her expression change before she could control it. She told him yes. He nodded as though she had confirmed something he had already known. He told her he had known her father, not in passing, closely. Reed von Abend had been an ally of the Rasul house before the framing. They had served together in 2 campaigns when they were both young men. They had served on the same council in the years after. Reed had been the kind of friend Aldous had brought wine to on the evenings when council had ended late, and Aldous had been the kind of friend Reed had trusted with the names of his children when they were born. The trial had been false from start to finish. Aldous had known it from the day the charges were filed. He had known the pattern of the evidence because he had recognized the hand of the man who had assembled it. Duke Alba, working through proxies, building a case so airtight that the only way to dismantle it would have been to make a public counter-accusation against Alba himself. Aldous had been considering it. He had been preparing it. He had been a week from filing it when his own inner circle had advised him, in plain language, that the move would not save Reed. It would only collapse 2 ducal houses instead of 1. Civil war, cascade. The kingdom's center coming apart at the seam. He had stayed silent. He had watched Reed stripped of land, title in everything but name, and exiled to the slums of his own city. He had watched her mother lose the people who had attended her at her wedding. He had watched Leah born into a house that no longer had a kitchen with a working fire. He had carried all of it for 5 years. He apologized. He used the word, not the formal noble apology, not the courtly phrasing, just the word, said simply, with the particular weight a man puts on it when he is not asking the listener to absolve him. He told her he could not undo what he had failed to do. He told her he was telling her now, because somewhere in the capital this morning, the man who had ordered the framing, and the man above him, the one Reed had been a single piece of evidence away from exposing, was hearing news that the von Abend family had just walked into the Lasur sick room and saved a Duke's heir. That news, Aldous said, would land on a desk much higher than Duke Alba's. The man at that desk would dismiss her as insignificant, because that was the kind of man he was, and his dismissal would buy the von Abend family perhaps a season of safety before he reconsidered. He did not name the man. He did not have to. The shape of the reference was unmistakable. Someone above Duke Alba, someone who arranged removals at the level of noble houses, someone whose existence Ellis had not previously had a name for. She filed the shape. She would learn the name later. She sat very still while the Duke spoke. Palm in her lap was completely silent. She had stopped moving when the Duke said her father's name. When the Duke finished, the room was quiet for what felt like a long time and was probably half a minute. She told him, finally, that she had not known any of it. He told her he had assumed she had not. He told her he was telling her now because she was the only person in the von Abend household with the capacity to hear it without breaking. He apologized again, more briefly this time, for needing her to be that person. She told him she could be that person. He nodded. The Duke laid out what he was offering. It was not charity. He used that word too, explicitly, twice, to make sure she understood. He was not offering the von Abend family pity money or sentimental restitution. He was offering an alliance. The Lasur ducal house would extend formal protection. That meant if Duke Alba moved against her family in any way, political, legal, physical, the Lasur house would respond as if it had been moved against itself. Alba had been able to destroy them 5 years ago because there had been no one willing to stand between him and her father. There would be someone now. The Lasur house would also reopen the doors her father had been shut out of, the councils he had been excluded from, the legal reviews of his framing that had been declined for procedural reasons. None of those would happen quickly. Restitution of a noble house was a process that took years, not months. But the process would now happen. The path existed where there had been no path. In exchange, the Duke wanted access to her alchemy on terms they would agree on later. He wanted continued care for Rudos's recovery. He wanted her counsel on the magical noise problem, because if his son was sensitive to it, other noble children might be too, and the kingdom would eventually need to know. He wanted, last, her cooperation when the time came to act against Duke Alba. Not soon, not without preparation, but when. He waited. She thought about it for less than 10 seconds. The arithmetic was straightforward. She had been planning to spend years climbing into a position from which the von Abend family could begin to fight back. The Duke was offering to skip the climb. The cost was that she would spend that time as a junior partner in someone else's strategy rather than as her own free agent. The cost was acceptable. The benefit was a future for her family that she had not previously been able to see. She told him she accepted. She added one condition. She told him the Lasur house's protection should extend without making the von Abend family visibly dependent. Public visibility would make them a target faster. She asked him to keep the alliance discreet for now, to be exercised in private channels, to be deployed publicly only when it would land cleanly. He agreed. He told her he had been planning to offer exactly that. He asked if he could speak with her father directly in the coming days. She told him her father would welcome it. They stood. She was still holding Palm. The Duke walked her to the door of the sitting room. Before he opened it, he stopped, looked down at her, and said one more thing. Your father raised a daughter I would have been proud to call my niece. She did not have an answer for that. She nodded. He opened the door. They walked out. Dorgan was waiting in the corridor. He looked at her expression. He did not ask. He fell into step beside her as the head butler walked them back toward the entry hall. Palm was still in her arms. She had not asked to be put down. At the front door of the mansion, the head butler bowed again. The same depth of bow he had given in the upstairs corridor. He told her, very formally, that she would be welcome at the Lasur house at any hour of any day for as long as she lived. She thanked him. She meant it. Dorgan and Ellis walked out into the noble district. The morning had turned into midday. The streets were busier than they had been at dawn. He did not run this time. He did not carry her. They walked at her pace, which was the pace of an 8-year-old whose legs had been on borrowed adrenaline for several hours and were beginning to remember they were 8. Halfway home, Dorgan said one thing. He'll keep his word. She nodded. She had decided the same thing. They parted at the edge of her district. She told him she would come to the guild tomorrow. He told her there was no rush. He told her to sleep first. She walked the last few streets alone with Palm in her arms. Her mother was in the front garden when she came up the path. She had been in the front garden for some time, Ellis could tell. She had a basket beside her with a few weeds in it that were clearly an excuse to stand outside the door. She straightened when she saw her. Her face went through a small, careful arrangement that was meant to look casual and did not entirely succeed. She asked very lightly whether Ellis had eaten. She told her not yet. Her mother took her hand. She did not ask anything else until they were inside. In the dining room, her father was at the table. Mother had brought out a late lunch of bread and the same vegetable soup the family had been eating for years. And Leah was on the floor playing with a small wooden block Mira had carved for her. Mira was at the side of the room, hands folded against her apron, watching Ellis the way Mira watched her when she had questions she had decided not to ask. She sat down at the table. She told them, in order, what had happened. The cure, the delivery, Rudos waking, the conversation with the Duke, Reed's old friendship, the framing, the years of silence, the alliance. She did not editorialize. She gave them the facts the Duke had given her. Her father did not move while she was speaking. He was looking at his hands on the table, the way people look at their hands when they need somewhere to put their eyes that is not other people. When she finished, he stayed quiet for a long second. Then he put his face in his hands. He did not sob. He did not perform grief. He just put his face in his hands and did not move for what felt like a minute and was probably less. Her mother reached over and put her hand on the back of his shoulder. She did not say anything either. She just kept her hand there. After a while, her father lifted his face. His eyes were wet. He did not pretend they were not. He told her, in a voice that was not quite steady, that he had not let himself believe, for 5 years, that anyone with power in this kingdom still remembered him as he had been. He had decided, sometime around the 2nd year, that the silence was the kingdom's verdict, that his name had been replaced with the charges, and that the charges were now his name, and that when he died, he would die under that name. He told her Aldous de Rasoul had remembered. He told her that was a thing he had not been ready to be given today. He stood up. He walked around the table. He knelt in front of the chair Ellis was sitting in. Her father, knight commander of the kingdom in another life, on his knees in his own dining room. And he put both of his hands over both of hers, and he thanked her. He thanked her for going to the guild that first morning. He thanked her for the secrets he now knew she had been keeping. He thanked her for refusing to be the daughter of a ruined man. She did not have a response for that either. She let him hold her hands. Palm, still in her lap, leaned forward and pressed her nose against her father's wrist, gently, the way she did when she had decided someone needed her there. Her mother was crying quietly into her sleeve. Mira's hands were still folded against her apron, but her face had stopped being controlled. Leah, on the floor, looked up. She did not understand what had happened. She had figured out, in the way 4-year-olds figure things out, that something good was happening. She climbed up into the chair beside Ellis, leaned her head against her arm, and announced that she was hungry. They ate. She did not finish her soup. She was tired in a way she had not been tired before. The muscles in her shoulders had let go all at once and were refusing to reassemble. Her mother sent her upstairs after Leah. Palm followed her up. She lay down on top of the bedspread without changing out of her dress. Palm curled against her hip. Outside the window, the afternoon light was the color of warm honey. She had a duke as an ally. Her father had been told, by a man who had power, that his name was still his. The kingdom did not know it yet, but the von Abend family had a future this morning that it had not had yesterday. Somewhere across the city, the man whose name the duke had not spoken was probably hearing about the morning's events. He would dismiss her. He would dismiss the alliance. He would file the news and move on. He could file what he wanted. They were going to keep working. She closed her eyes. She slept. Several weeks later, the Duke called Ellis into his study and offered her the easy path. The capital had begun to cool toward winter. Rutos had been steadily improving, color in his face, mana waveform clean, weight returning. She had visited the Lazar house every few days to monitor the recovery and adjust the dosing of a smaller maintenance potion she had brewed. Aldous and her father had met twice, privately, in the von Abend dining room, and had begun the slow work of mapping out the discreet alliance. The Duke poured tea himself. He set the cup in front of her. He told her, plainly, that the Royal Lapisford Academy entrance season was approaching, and that he intended to fund her enrollment in full. The fees were nothing to him. The application would be a formality with his backing. The political protection of being publicly known as a Lazar-sponsored student would extend onto the academy grounds, where Sophia Alba was already enrolled and would otherwise be the dominant freshman of her year. He presented it the way one presents a tool to someone who has earned it. She declined. She told him she appreciated the offer. She told him she understood what he was doing for her with it. She told him that she needed to walk into the academy on her own merit, not under his shield, because the kind of student she intended to become was one whose presence could not be questioned by anyone who looked at her resume. The special recommendation exam, the scholarship route, was the way to do that. The Duke considered her for a moment. He did not argue. He nodded. He told her he would have the Lasser House carriage take her to the exam on the morning, that she should consider the carriage itself a gift rather than a sponsorship signal, and that if she failed, the regular enrollment offer would still be open. He told her he would have a recommendation letter prepared as a procedural courtesy. She thanked him. She drank the tea. Palm was on the rug at her feet, watching the fire in the hearth. The exam was in 4 weeks. She had 4 weeks to prepare. The morning of the exam, the house was up before dawn. Her mother had made her a new dress for the day, pale blue, simple, well cut, the kind of dress that said competent rather than wealthy. She had been working on it in the evenings for the last 3 weeks. She had not told her it was for the exam until that morning. Mira did the buttons at the back. She made Ellis turn twice. She announced that she was acceptable, which from Mira was a higher rating than acceptable. Leah gave her a small folded handkerchief she had embroidered herself with a slightly lopsided star. She told her, very seriously, that the star was for luck and that she had to bring it back. She told her she would. Her father did not say much. He came to the door with her. He put one hand on her shoulder. He told her, quietly, that he was proud of her whether she passed or failed, and that he expected she would pass anyway. He then added, in a slightly drier voice, that he had not made her practice the formal noble greeting in case she encountered Sophia Alba at the gate, and that she should improvise. She told him she would. The Lasser carriage was at the end of the drive. Zedric, the head butler, was at the reins. Palm climbed into the carriage ahead of her with the air of an animal who had been promised a ride. She waved from the window. Her family stood in the doorway, smaller and smaller as the carriage moved. The capital streamed past. The white walls of the Royal Lapisford Academy came up over the eastern roofs. She had 4 hours of exam ahead of her. The first exam was Alchemy Practical. The room was Q Building, Research Room 3. She had been expecting a formal exam hall. The room she walked into looked like someone had been thrown out of it midway through a project and never let back in. Broken flasks on the floor, a small mountain of opened books in one corner, herbs and minerals piled in disorganized heaps along the long bench, a faint smell of something that had once been a reagent and was now something else. A woman was asleep at the bench. She had a tall, pointed black hat that had slid sideways. Her robe had a blot of something dried into the front of it that Ellis did not want to identify. She looked, when she opened one eye, exactly like a person who had not been informed there was an exam this morning until 10 minutes ago. She introduced herself as Mary. She told Ellis she was a professor. She told her she was popular, which Ellis doubted in real time. She gestured at the heaps on the bench. She told her to make her something. She did not specify what. She informed her, when Ellis asked for a recipe, that the recipe had been blown off the desk in a previous experiment, and that she had not bothered to reconstruct it. The exam was the chaos itself. Ellis walked along the bench. She closed her eyes and felt for the mana signatures of every material on it. About a third of them were dangerous in combination: toxic herbs, iron-rich water that would inhibit catalysis, 2 minerals whose interaction would generate enough heat to crack the bench. She removed those first, one by one, and set them aside in a separate pile so that the safe materials remained. Mary watched. She did not say anything. She was, Ellis realized, awake now. She selected the cleanest combination of safe materials and announced she would produce an intermediate-grade mana recovery potion. She activated holy water with a precise magic array. She added silver powder. She formed the philosopher's light in her palm and infused it gently into the flask. The room filled with warm gold light. Mary made a small noise. The noise turned into a word, repeated under her breath. Primordial light, she said, a name Ellis had not heard before for what she had been making. She picked up the finished potion, deep blue, perfectly clear, the kind of clarity that meant 0 impurities, and her hand was unsteady when she turned the flask. She asked her full name. She told her, Ellis von Abend. She stamped her crystal exam card with a hard motion. She told her, in a voice that had stopped sounding sleepy, that she had passed with full marks and that she was going to enjoy having her as a student. She told her to go on to the next exam. She went. In the corridor outside, a girl with golden hair walked past her from the opposite direction. She slowed. She turned her head as they passed. She told her, with a small, unreadable smile, that she smelled like a goddess. She kept walking before Ellis could ask what she meant. The second exam was mana measurement. The magic hall was the kind of building cathedrals would have been jealous of. Vaulted ceiling, stained glass running the entire height of the eastern wall, a circular floor with 4 stone pedestals at its center, each topped with a crystal ball the size of a melon. The 4 candidates assembled at the 4 crystals. Ellis was one. The girl who had told her she smelled like a goddess was another. Golden hair, holy aura, calm posture. The third was a black-haired boy carrying a long sword in a back scabbard, looking nervous. The fourth was a girl with long purple hair and the same pointed hat aesthetic as Mary the alchemy professor, though much more put together about it. An old wizard examiner stepped to the center. He explained the rules in a voice that filled the hall without any apparent effort. Touch the crystal. Pour in all the mana you have. The crystal glows by color. No change for C or below. Blue for B, red for A, purple for S. B was the minimum to pass. They would go in order around the circle. The black-haired boy went first. He strained for several seconds. The crystal glowed blue. B rank. He stepped back, relieved and slightly disappointed, and the examiner moved on. The golden-haired girl placed her hand on her crystal with the casualness of someone collecting a parcel from a counter. The crystal glowed instantly red, a rank. She bowed once and stepped back. The purple-haired girl was next. She put her hand on her crystal with the confidence of someone who had been told what her result would be since childhood. The crystal flashed purple, brighter than the stained glass overhead, and the entire hall was briefly bathed in violet light, S rank. She turned and looked across the circle at Ellis with the appraising look of a competitor sizing up the only other candidate worth measuring. Ellis's turn. She placed both hands on her crystal. She closed her eyes. She let mana flow into it the way she had been letting it flow into alchemy reactions for the last 6 months. Not hard, not fast, just continuously and cleanly. The entire reservoir over the course of of several seconds. She opened her eyes when the room went red. The crystal in front of her was glowing the color of arterial blood, steady, bright, sustained beyond the moment she had stopped pouring. A rank. The examiner read the result aloud for the official record. The purple-haired girl's eyebrows went up half an inch. The golden-haired girl's small smile did not change. The number sat in her chest. A goddess somewhere had filed her as 0 aptitude in less than a minute. A neutral instrument in a kingdom institution had just measured her at A. Both numbers belonged to the same person. They were going to see whose number was going to last. The examiner thanked them. He told them the third exam was next. The third exam was the forest. They were teleported in individually. Ellis landed alone in a clearing with a small map and a black teleport stone that the spatial mage had told them would return them to the academy when they were done. 3 colored mana orbs were hidden in the forest: blue, red, purple. They had until dusk. No combat between candidates. The forest had monsters up to D rank. She had a few hours. She had been killing D rank since the orc. She started with the blue orb because the blue orb's signature was closest to her position. She tracked it through standard forest, found it floating in the air between 2 trees, and learned within the first 30 seconds that it ran. It did not fight. It fled. She cast a movement enhancement on her legs, chased it through 3 clearings, set a fireball in front of its escape line as an interception, and shattered it with a second precision shot when it stalled. The blue crystal fell to the moss. She picked it up. 1 down. She walked east. She extended her mana sense outward in a slow, wide sweep. 2 more signatures, purple closer than red. She went toward purple. She found a cave. The cave was a bait setup. She knew this the moment she entered because the chest in the middle of the room was empty when she tested it from a distance with a small thrown stone. The orb signature was above her. She tilted her head up. The spider was the size of a small carriage, 8 legs gripping the ceiling, compound eyes catching the light from her mana lamp and throwing it back as 8 points of reflection. The purple orb was tucked against its abdomen, glowing softly through the bristles. The spider was watching her. She shot the orb first. A precision fireball, threaded between 2 of the spider's legs, hit the orb at the contact point with the abdomen. The orb shattered. The crystal fell. The spider screamed. The sound was not a sound a body should be able to make. It dropped. The fight was the orc upgraded. The spider was faster, larger, and equipped with acid web that melted stone where it landed. She did not engage it directly. She worked the room. A barrage of small fireballs into the ceiling cracked its footing across half the cave. She followed with water magic to flood the floor and turn it into mud. The spider came at her from the ceiling with the leap she had been waiting for. She caught it in fire, not a wall, a prison. Spiraling pillars of flame rising from the wet floor in a tight ring around the spider's landing point. The wet floor turned to steam. The steam superheated. The spider was inside the steam. She closed the prison with the spiral flare she had developed against the orc, grown larger now and tighter, a fire wind torsion that drove down into the heart of the trapped space. The spider stopped screaming. When the flames thinned, only the body of the spider was left. After a few seconds, the body collapsed inward, and only a large black magic stone remained on the cave floor. She picked up the purple crystal. She picked up the magic stone. She left the cave. She had 2 of 3. The light outside was already gold orange. She had less time than she had thought. She sat down under a tree in a small clearing to let her reserves come back enough for the third orb. She closed her eyes for a minute. Something high-pitched and panicked broke through the trees. The purple-haired girl from the mana measurement burst out of the tree line at a flat run. She was screaming. The screaming was not screaming about being attacked. The screaming was screaming about being chased by an insect, which Ellis learned within the first second of her arrival, because she was specifically yelling that there was a bug, and it was big. The bee that came out of the trees behind her was the size of a large dog, yellow and black, long curved stinger, sickle-like forelegs, the kind insects develop when they have decided to start picking up small prey directly. The girl who had melted the entire magic hall to violet light an hour earlier was now collapsed at her feet, shaking. Ellis had not had time to bring her mana back to full. She had enough for a wall. She set up a firewall between the bee and them. The wall was small. It bought maybe 10 seconds. She told the girl that this was her bee. She told her she had S-rank power. She told her to use it. The girl made a strangled sound. She stood. She got herself back into the part of her brain that had passed an S-rank crystal an hour ago. She raised one hand and chanted a dark magic spell Ellis had not seen before, a concentrated black spear that condensed out of the air in front of her palm. and she threw it through the firewall when Ellis dropped it on her cue. The bee had time to make one sound before the spear went through it. It came apart into ash, and a magic stone fell where it had been. The girl sat down very suddenly. She put both hands over her face. After about 5 seconds, she peeked through her fingers at Ellis. She thanked her. Then she introduced herself in a voice that was still a little shaky as Yuri. She told her her name. Yuri told her, mostly to make conversation while her heart rate came down, that she had seen a red orb earlier near a small plaza to the east. 3 stone statues, circular cobblestones, the orb floating somewhere in the area. She had been planning to go back for it after she had recovered from the bee. She told her to consider it traded for the rescue. She laughed. It was a small laugh, but it was real. She wished Ellis luck on the 3rd orb. They went separate directions. The plaza was where she had said it would be. 3 statues. 2 of goddesses Ellis did not recognize from any of her reading. One with a crescent moon held above her head, one with an open book, and the central, tallest statue. It was Layla. The statue was accurate. The hair was the color of bleached paper. The pose was the same impassive posture she remembered from the white void. The eyes were carved from a pale stone that reflected nothing. She stopped at the edge of the plaza. The cobblestones were old. The statue was old. She did not have any reason to assume the carving had been made with her goddess specifically in mind. It was simply that this had been her face since before she died, and would continue being her face after the people in front of her had forgotten her name. The red orb was hidden somewhere in the plaza. She could feel its signature, close, not visible, masked. She cast a wide water spell in a fine mist over the entire plaza. The mist clung to the orb where it was floating, just above the central statue's head. The orb activated when it was revealed. Fireballs came at her first, fast, repeated, in patterns. She broke for cover behind one of the smaller statues. The fireballs scorched the stone where she had been standing. She came around the side, threw a barrage of her own, and cracked the orb's outer shield. It retaliated with a single concentrated beam, the kind of weapon she had not seen before. A focused energy lance the width of her arm, which it began sweeping across the plaza in a wide arc. She had been holding the spiral flare back. She let it go. The fire wind spiral she had killed the spider with met the energy beam in the air above the plaza. The two collided. The collision was a sound and a shape and a heat that knocked her off her feet against the statue of the goddess holding the book. When she got up, the energy beam was gone. The orb had fallen out of the air, and the statue of Layla was scorched along the side from the deflection. She walked across the plaza. She picked up the red crystal. She looked briefly up at the statue's face. The face had not changed expression. She had not expected it to. The goddess was not in that statue. The statue was a piece of stone that had been told to hold her shape and was holding it. But the orb that had been built into the statue had attacked her with the fire she had given other people permission to use against her, and she had answered the attack with fire she had told her she did not have, and the answer had landed. That was enough for one afternoon. She held the 3 crystals against her chest. She drew the small black teleport stone from her belt. She activated it. The plaza dissolved into white. The teleportation room reassembled around her. She was the only candidate back. The proctor, a thin man in a spatial mage's robe, looked up from his ledger and approached. He asked to see what she had collected. She produced the 3 crystals one at a time, blue, purple, red. He inspected each. He recorded the times. He told her, in the formal tone of a man closing a record, that she had returned within the time limit and that the final exam was complete. Results would be announced in several weeks. She handed him her crystal exam card. He stamped it. He returned it to her. She walked out of the teleportation room into the corridor. The academy at Sunset was a different building from the one she had walked into that morning. The corridors were empty. The high windows along the eastern wall had gone the color of warm honey. Her footsteps were the only sound. The buildings around her were the buildings she had been planning to study in for the last 6 months. She did not yet know if she had earned the right to walk in them as a student rather than as an applicant. She reached the front gates. She passed through them. The Lazar carriage was waiting at the curb. Zedric was at the reins. He saw her face and asked nothing. He helped her up. The carriage started home. She did not yet know whether she had passed. She had given everything she had to give in the room. That had to be enough for now. Several months later, in spring, Ellis was sitting in the back row of the entrance ceremony hall. She had passed. The acceptance letter had arrived 3 weeks after the exam. She had been admitted with full scholarship and partial credit exemption. The von Abend family had read the letter together at the dining table. Her father had not cried this time. He had laughed. She was wearing the academy's first-year uniform, pale green sash, white blouse, dark green skirt. The uniform had been adjusted to fit her by her mother, because the academy's smallest standard size was still made for someone 2 years older than she was. The freshman representative was announced. She walked to the podium with the practiced poise of a girl who had been preparing for this moment since she could speak. Sophia Alba. She had her father's eyes. She had her father's mouth. She gave a polished speech about service and excellence and the proud tradition of the Alba family's contribution to the kingdom's leadership. She named her father by name. She thanked him with a precise public warmth for raising her to value the responsibilities that came with their position. She finished to applause. Ellis sat in the back row and did not move. Then the second representative was announced, the recipient of the medical recovery citation, the heir to the Lasur ducal house, returning to the academy after his recovery from a recent illness. Rutos Lasur walked to the podium. He was healthy. The fragile boy she had administered 8 drops of aurora to in his sick room had become a tall 15-year-old with the same silver blonde hair as his father and a steady speaking voice. He gave a speech about the value of life. He gave a speech about second chances. He thanked by name the alchemist who had saved him and announced to the assembled hall that she would be enrolling at this academy in this year's class and that he hoped she would know she had his gratitude. The hall did not breathe for a second. Sophia Alba's expression, visible in profile from where Ellis was sitting, did several small specific things in sequence. The polished smile froze. The eyes narrowed. The poise reassembled. Then her gaze went slowly, very slowly, across the rows of students in the hall, looking for the person Rutos had named. Several students nearby turned to look at the small girl in the back row whose uniform had clearly been pinned to fit. She sat very still. She did not look at Sophia. She did not have to. The line of her gaze landed across the room the way the energy beam in the plaza had landed across the cobblestones. Specific, direct, unfinished. The ceremony went on. The headmaster spoke. The senior students performed magic and sword demonstrations. The hall applauded politely. When the ceremony ended, she left the hall through a side door. She had walked into this academy on her own merit. She had a duke as an ally and a friend named Yuri, somewhere in the same first-year class. She had a public acknowledgement from a rescued noble heir. She had, as of this morning, an enemy in the freshman representative who had just been told that the alchemist who upstaged her family's political position was sitting 11 rows behind her, 8 years old, holding a luck handkerchief in a uniform pinned to fit. Somewhere across the city, the man whose name the Duke had not spoken would be reading the day's reports. Sophia in the morning, a new student worth tracking by lunch. A small footnote that he would shelve until he had time to look closer. He would find time eventually. She walked out into the spring morning with the sun on her face. The luck handkerchief was in her pocket where Leah had told her to keep it. The first day of classes was in 3 days. The plan was beginning.